symbolical of the 7 great divisions or varieties or temperaments of life. In American Masonry, according to Mackey's Encyclopedia, the apron is the same in all the 3 degrees of blue masonry, being made of white lambskin with a narrow edging of blue ribbon. Co-masonry follows the usage prevailing in the Grand Lodge of England, save that instead of sky blue for the edging and rosettes, an edging of deeper blue with a narrow border of crimson is prescribed, and the rosettes are made of similar material. The tassels are gilded instead of silvered, and their 7 lines symbolize the 7 rays of life and the 7 grades of matter. Our illustrations give an idea of the Master Mason aprons as worn in Egypt and at the present day. The ceremony of censing. When all have taken their places, the ceremony of censing begins. The thurifer advances to the pedestal of the right worshipful master, who places upon the charcoal in the censer some incense which he has previously magnetized, or better still, he magnetizes the incense as it is melting in the censer, for that is the condition in which it is most responsive to his power. As the ceremony is not known in some lodges, I reprint it here from the co-Masonic ritual. During the ceremony, appropriate music is played, the brethren remaining standing. When all are in their places, the thurifer advances to the pedestal of the right worshipful master, who places upon the charcoal in the censer some incense which he has previously consecrated. The thurifer steps back and bows to the right worshipful master, who returns the bow. He then censes the right worshipful master, with 3 triple swings, the chains being held short and the censer extended at the level of the eyes, but slightly lowered after the first and second sets of triple swings. The censer is then grasped firmly by the chains in the right hand, and swung with full chain in the form of a V, 3 long dignified strokes to the right of the pedestal, then 3 to the left. Then, with the arm extended in front, the censer is swung in 7 graduated circles, each circle above the other, so that by the time the 7th and smallest circle is made, the arm is raised to its full height. The thurifer bows again to the right worshipful master, and then passes directly to the altar, which he encircles, beginning at the east, swinging the censer at short chain with a circular motion. He then returns to the right worshipful master's pedestal, bows and squares the lodge to the worshipful junior warden's pedestal, where the ceremony which took place at the previous pedestal is repeated, save that the worshipful junior warden receives 5 swings of the censer, 1 triple and 2 single. A pause is observed between single swings, just as between triple swings. He next passes to the worshipful senior warden's pedestal, censing him in identical fashion, save that he receives 7 swings, 2 triple and 1 single. The thurifer now turns to the junior deacon, bows to him, and after the bow has been returned, censes him with 3 single swings, after which they bow as before, and the thurifer squares the lodge to the senior deacon, who is censed in a similar manner, but with 4 swings, 1 triple and 1 single. The thurifer now censes the distinguished visitors according to their rank, beginning with those of highest dignity, bows as he passes the right worshipful master's pedestal and censes the past masters. He then takes up his position before the master's pedestal, having returned directly thereto. Then, having bowed to him, he turns and faces the brethren, bows to them collectively, and censor them successively, beginning with those on his left hand, and ending with those on his right. This is accomplished by a number of short swings, aimed down the south column and up the north in rapid succession. The brethren stand with the hands joined before the breast and the palms laid together, and bow successively as the gaze of the thurifer meets theirs. This ceremonial should be carefully carried out, each brother bowing a moment later than his predecessor. The above-mentioned position of the hands should be adopted by all officers while they are being censed. The thurifer squares the lodge and passes to the position of the inner guard, whom he censes with 2 single swings. Then he hands the censer to him. The inner guard censes the tiler with a single swing, and then hands the censer to him. The whole ceremony should be carried out as briskly as is consistent with dignity. There should be no unnecessary delay. As the thurifer censes the different pedestals, the brethren should unite in thought upon the three principles which they represent: right worshipful master, wisdom, worshipful senior warden, strength, worshipful junior warden, beauty. This should also be done while the candles are being lighted at each pedestal. When the altar is reached, the thought should be on the unity of brotherhood. The sensing of the pedestals in this manner produces in front of each of them a highly magnetized cone, or beehive-shaped form, in which the candidate stands when he comes before any of the pedestals. It is erected for that purpose and can be stretched when several candidates come together, but it becomes a little tenuous if the number is large. The sensing of the officials is intended to prepare them for the work which they have to do. The varied number of swings is given not only to honor the person, but to strengthen him for his work, and it does so by setting up a line of communication with the forces of the inner planes. The higher the man is in degree, the more does he himself give in proportion to what is received. The master gives most of all, but the columns receive more than they give. Yet each one should try as the thurifer turns to him to give as much as he possibly can. This use of incense is perfectly scientific. All occult students are aware that, as was said in the last chapter, there is no such thing as really dead matter, but that everything in nature possesses and radiates out its own vibration or combination of vibrations. Every chemical element has thus its own set of influences, which are useful in certain directions and useless or even hostile in others. It is in this way quite possible, for example, to mingle certain gums which, when burnt as incense, will strongly stimulate the purer and higher emotions, but one could just as easily make another mixture whose vibrations would promote the most undesirable feelings. This is a matter about which some people are skeptical, because humanity is at present passing through a stage in its evolution during which its development is almost exclusively that of the lower mind, which is fiercely intolerant of anything which it has not specially studied. We all know how difficult it has been until quite lately to gain any recognition for non-physical phenomena, such as those of telepathy or clairvoyance, or indeed anything outside the most materialistic science. Now the time has come when men are beginning to see that life is full of invisible influences, whose value can be recognized by sensitive people. The effect of incense is an instance of this class of phenomena, as is also the result of the use of talismans and of certain precious stones, each of which vibrates at its own rate and has its own value. Such things are not usually of importance so great that we need give much time to their consideration, but they all have their effects, and are therefore not to be entirely neglected by wise people. The incense used in the lodge tends to purify that part of man's nature which is sometimes called the astral body, as it is made of gums which give off an intensely cleansing vibration. In this respect its effect is analogous to the sprinkling of a disinfectant, which will spread about in the air and destroy undesirable germs, though in this case the operation is on higher levels and in finer matter. It has also the effect of attracting denizens of the inner worlds whose presence is helpful to our working, and of driving away those which are unsuitable. Two of the most important constituents of such incense as is useful for our work are benzoin and olibanum. The benzoin is a vigorous purifier, and tends to drive away all coarse or sensuous feelings and thoughts. The olibanum has nothing to do with that, but it creates a devotional and restful atmosphere, and tends to stimulate those vibrations in the astral body which make people responsive to higher things. Attar of roses is also useful, and adds greatly to the effect produced. If the incense is intelligently magnetized, its strength is increased enormously, for example, by putting into olibanum the definite force of the will in the direction of calmness and devotion, its influence may be increased by perhaps 100-fold. That is why the incense in church is always taken up to the celebrant to be blessed, and why in the lodge it is brought to the right worshipful master in order that he may magnetize it with whatever special quality he thinks will be helpful for the work of the day. The sprinkling of holy water in a church is another way of producing a similar effect, but incense has the advantage that it rises into the air, and wherever a single particle goes, the purification and blessing is born with it. It is desirable on all occasions, and especially in lodge, in the interests of the work, that the brethren should have in their minds but a few definite and strong vibrations of emotion and thought, but instead of that they sometimes have 40 or 50 small vortices of emotional and mental activity all whirling at once, each representing some small worry or care or desire. It is difficult for a person to do good work while these are present, and almost impossible for him to make real progress in the evolution of consciousness. If he is trying to attain a better emotional and mental condition, the incense will offer him a strengthening current of vibration which will help very much in combing out the tangle and producing calm and steadiness. We sometimes find that there is much prejudice against the use of incense, because it is supposed to be connected exclusively with the ceremonies of the Roman Church, for it is only there and in some of the higher Anglican churches that Western people ever see it. Those who have traveled in the East or are interested in the study of other faiths know that practically all the religions of the world use incense in one form or another. It appears in the temples of the Hindus, the Zoroastrians, the Jains, and in the Shinto of China and Japan. It was used in Greece, in Rome, in Persia, and in the ceremonies of Mitra. All these people, including the Roman Catholics, avail themselves of it because they know it to be a useful thing. Why then should not we? For a time in England there was a very strong Puritan wave shortly after the Reformation which led to the murder of King Charles, to the Commonwealth and to Cromwell's rule. True, there was a reaction at the time of the Restoration, but the Puritan feeling seems to have been of the most intense kind, and traces of it still remain in England, some of them showing themselves in the most amazing and unreasoning prejudice. That feeling has sometimes entered Masonic circles, and efforts have been made to induce the Grand Lodge to limit the definition of the Great Architect, so as to exclude the possible association of Masonry with non-Protestant beliefs. But the Grand Lodge has liberally refused to create any such limitations. Under the Grand Lodge of England, incense is prescribed for the ceremony of consecrating a lodge, and the consecrating officer and the wardens are censed, though no definite number of swings appears to be laid down. Incense is also used in the consecration of a chapter of the Holy Royal Arch, under the Supreme Grand Chapter of England, and in the ceremonial of many of the higher degrees. Thus its introduction into comasonic lodges is in no way an innovation, but is in full accordance with Masonic usage. The number of swings given to each of the non-official brethren indicates his particular rank in the order, for the degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite are taken into account in comasonry. Each thus receives the influence he needs, that he may be strengthened for the work which his rank qualifies him to do. Each brother, as he is censed, bows out of respect, and as a token that he dedicates all the force that he has to the great architect of the universe. Lighting the candles. The senior deacon is the Lucifer, who bears the light to his fellow men. The light having been given to him from the sacred fire by the immediate past master, he carries it to the right worshipful master, who by means of a small taper lights from it the tall candle standing on his right, and then puts out his taper with an extinguisher. He must not blow it out, because that would suggest the pollution of the sacred fire by the breath, which is unclean. It is for the same reason that the Parsis, who are sometimes called fire worshippers, because they regard that element as the greatest symbol and expression of the divine, will on no account pollute it with refuse. The right worshipful master says, "May the light of wisdom illumine our work. His wisdom is infinite." The senior deacon then carries the light to the worshipful senior and worshipful junior wardens, who light their candles and speak appropriately of the strength and the beauty of the great architect of the universe. In this ceremony, we are reminded once more of the three aspects of the great architect of the universe, and here they are symbolized as coming forth from the unconditioned into conditioned form in the order of wisdom, strength, and beauty, in preparation for the opening of the lodge, the commencement of the work of the building of the temple. When the work begins, as we shall see in the next chapter, the process is reversed, but here we have only the preparation, the coming forth of the wisdom to plan, the strength to execute, and then the beauty to adorn. The use of fire in ecclesiastical or Masonic ceremonies is but little understood. The lighting of a candle with religious intention is analogous to a prayer, and always invokes a downpouring of force from on high. Thus, the three principal officers, in uttering these phrases as they light their candles, are not only announcing in symbol that they represent certain aspects of the divine, but are actually opening the way to a definite link with those aspects, which is made in response to their request. The electric lights which are used instead of candles in some lodges do not produce the same effect. They give light but not fire, and therefore fail of their full result. Electric light is, however, permissible for the blazing star and the star of initiation, where the action and the symbolism are solely that of the light. What I have said before about the assistance that should be given to the officers by the brethren applies here most emphatically. When the right worshipful master says, "May his wisdom illumine our work," all should join with him in a strong effort to call down the divine wisdom, so that through him it may pour out upon the brethren. So also when the worshipful senior warden says, "May the light of strength sustain our work," all should think earnestly of the divine strength, and send up an aspiration that it may flow through him. And once more a similar effort is to be made when the worshipful junior warden says, "May the light of beauty make manifest our work," and the immediate past master declares, "His light dwelleth ever in our midst." We must not attach to these thoughts the old, and I think false, idea of prayer, that we need to beseech the attention of the great architect of the universe. We know that he is always sending down his force. It is our business to open the channel. His symbol down here is the sun, which is always pouring out light and life and glory without being asked to shine. In the utterance of these words, therefore, we are only seeking to make ourselves and the lodge channels for his service. During all these processes, the thought of the brethren is important, but most of all when the altar is censed should they think of the divine love. It falls to the right worshipful master to direct the whole work and to each of the officers to bear his part. But the full success of the scheme depends upon the recollectedness and unselfishness of every brother in the lodge. Without that there is no real life in the work. It is to be feared that in many Masonic lodges, though their work is deeply colored by the great ideal of charity, there is an entire failure to radiate the spiritual influence. They perform the ritual accurately and beautifully, but they have not realized how much depends upon the thought given to it, and the comprehension of all that it means and implies. The blessing of the great architect is invoked not so much by the mere formula of words and acts, as by the spirit that underlies the work of the lodge. Chapter 5. The opening of the lodge. The brethren assist. When the ceremony of lighting the candles is completed, the brethren take their seats, and the right worshipful master asks them to spend a few moments in aspiration to the great architect of the universe, earnestly resolving that the work to be done that evening shall be well and thoroughly done, and that each member shall never forget that he is doing it in his name and to his glory. The right worshipful master then gives a single knocks and calls upon the brethren to assist him in opening the lodge. Some may ask why he needs their assistance in so simple an act as declaring the lodge open, but the fact is that it is by no means so simple as this. The opening of a Masonic lodge is in itself an exceedingly beautiful and interesting ceremony, and the success of the evening's work depends upon its being properly and thoroughly done. The work before us is no light matter, for it is nothing less than a concerted effort to carry out the duty that is laid upon us, as those who possess the light, to spread that light abroad through the world, and actually to become fellow laborers with the great architect of the universe in his great plan for the evolution of our brethren. He pours spiritual strength into the world just as the sun pours out its light, but as there are many dark places in the world which the sunlight cannot directly reach, so are there many souls in the world who are unable to receive and assimilate this divine force. As man by means of mirrors can reflect the sunlight into a cave or cellar, so also can man reflect the spiritual light upon those darkened souls, and perchance present it to them so that they may be able to receive it and profit by it. All light in the world is but transmuted sunlight. If we burn coal and make gas, or if we burn oil in a lamp, the energy is none the less converted solar energy. The great architect sends forth his power at all levels, but most of all on the higher planes. But the majority of men are not yet sufficiently developed on those higher planes to be directly affected by this force. If, however, those men who are already somewhat developed at those levels will lay themselves open to receive that force, and slow down its vibrations by passing them through their own subtle bodies, it can then be poured out upon the world at large in an assimilable form. And this is a great part of the work that is being done by all those who wish to cooperate with him. I have explained in the Master's Mad the Path how one who approaches a master of the wisdom with a view to becoming his pupil and working under him for the good of mankind is first drawn into a wonderfully intimate association with that master, so that he may become a perfect channel for the distribution of spiritual forces. Precisely the same thing on a much smaller scale is being done by every human being who wishes well to his fellow man. Being developed somewhat above the average, he is able to receive and to profit by some at least of these forces, and he assuredly pours them out again on lower levels in goodwill and kindly feeling. The ceremonies of all great religions aim at producing such results on a larger scale by some sort of common action. In the science of the sacraments, I have explained the mechanism of this common action as far as the great Christian services are concerned, and the ceremonies of Freemasonry attain a similar object, though in a different way. The Christian service begins by building a great thought form to act as a kind of storage battery or condenser for this force, in order that, as it is gradually generated, it may be stored up for use instead of being allowed to dissipate itself uselessly in the ambient air, and we in Freemasonry have to take the same precaution. In both cases we invoke the aid of non-human entities, the inhabitants of those subtler planes, who are thoroughly accustomed to deal with and control the forces belonging to their respective levels. But there is a certain difference between the methods adopted in the Christian religion and in the old Egyptian mystery faith from which Masonry is derived. In Christianity we invoke great angels who are far above us in spiritual unfoldment, and place ourselves to a considerable extent in their hands, supplying them with the material of love and devotion and aspiration which the service calls forth from us, and leaving them largely to do the form building and the distribution. In Freemasonry also we invoke angelic aid, but those upon whom we call are nearer to our own level in development and intelligence, and each of them brings with him a number of subordinates who carry out his directions. All around us there is a vast unseen evolution, which may be thought of as parallel to our own. And just as our line of progress passes through the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom, and then carries us on to the superhuman developments of adeptship, so does that parallel evolution run through the various elemental kingdoms, the kingdom of the nature spirits, and then the kingdom of devas or angels. There are many levels of intelligence and holiness in this great angelic kingdom, and while it stretches upwards to heights far above those at present attainable by human beings, it has also members who are hardly at a higher level than our own. Those, however, are only the lowest members of the angelic kingdom, Next below them in development come the highest of the nature spirits, in the same way as the highest members of the animal kingdom come only just below the lowest human beings, and indeed in many cases the kingdoms overlap, for the most intelligent of the animal kingdom are frequently superior in many respects to the most degraded of human beings. In the church service we invoke the great archangels, beings very far above ourselves, though they also have their cohorts of assistants at a level much below their own. In Freemasonry we call rather upon beings at our own stage or slightly above it, and they bring with them assistance from the kingdom of the nature spirits and even of the elementals. In both cases the work is initiated by someone who is specially qualified and set apart to do it. In the church the priest, in Freemasonry the right worshipful master still. The assistance of the brethren present is always a matter of importance and significance. In ecclesiastical circles they often speak of the priesthood of the laity. Certain things the priest is commissioned to do, and only he can do them. But he requires the help and cooperation of the laity in order that he may work at the highest degree of effectiveness. It is exactly the same with the master of a Masonic lodge. He also has certain work to do, and unless there are other past masters present, he is the only man who can do it, but it will be done better and more easily if the brethren understand and cooperate. I remember well that when first I was elected right worshipful master of my mother lodge, I had to do all the magnetization in the opening procession myself. I had to march round the lodge, making an eddy in the flowing forces, building the preliminary thought form and filling it with a strong current of magnetism. Presently I explained matters to some of the older members of the lodge and told them how they could help in this work, and when they got into the habit of doing so I found that it made my own labors very much less. But remember that what the head of our august temple and fraternity wants is not a sort of bored acquiescence, but cordial cooperation. He wants the members really to be thinking vividly all the time and keeping their minds on what they are doing. If we hear the same thing over and over again, there is a certain tendency for it to become a matter of course, so that people give only half of their attention to it. That is not the way to get the best results. We must fix our minds strongly upon what we are saying and what we are doing. Only the officers have to give the responses at the opening of the lodge, but every member ought to know these responses by heart. When we come to the temple, we come for a definite purpose, not to get, but to give, and the amount that we are able to give in the way of spiritual force and help depends largely upon the intentness with which we fix our thought upon what we are doing, and the amount of definite understanding that we bring to it. It means a considerable mental effort, no doubt, but it is very well worthwhile to make it. When the right worshipful master asks for the assistance of the brethren, he also means that they should specially prepare themselves to cooperate in the work of the evening, and this important preliminary is achieved by his next questions. Tiling the lodge. The brethren being upstanding, the right worshipful master begins the proceedings by asking from the worshipful junior warden the characteristic question which is the keynote of every Masonic meeting. What is the first care of every Freemason? And receives the traditional reply, to see the lodge close tiled. He continues, direct that that duty be done. The worshipful junior warden passes on the command to the inner guard, who goes to see that the tiler is at his post, and reports that he is, this report being at once passed on to the right worshipful master. What is the symbolism here? The first requisite when we are about to do a great piece of work is to concentrate upon it, and in order to do that we must be free from interruption, so the fortress of man's soul needs a strong wall all round outside, and our entrance must be well guarded. Therefore the spirit calls to the intelligence, which is its link with the lower worlds. The intelligence asks the etheric double, who in turn signals the dense physical body to know how things look from the outside, and receives the satisfactory reply that all the defenses are in order, so that the spirit is reassured on the important point that the lodge may labor in safety. Each one of us has to tile his own lodge on various levels, and this must be done with great care and wisdom. Through thousands of years of past evolution, each man has been learning to build a strong shell for himself, so that within it he may grow into a powerful center, capable of radiating spiritual force upon his fellows. Inevitably, in the earlier stages of that growth, he becomes a self-centered being, thinking and caring only for his own interests, tiling his lodge indeed, but shutting out from it much that is noble and beautiful. Only by degrees does he learn that power is given to him for use in the service of others, and that while he must so tile his lodge as always to maintain the strong center of consciousness which he has been at such pains to create, he must at the same time watch ceaselessly to see that the force generated in that center is employed only in the helping of mankind and in the furtherance of the designs of the great architect of the universe. The man does not lose his individuality and initiative, but he learns to use them rightly. The man must learn to tile the lodge of his mental body, but this must be done with discretion and indeed with exceeding great care. We often find the physical world uncomfortably crowded, especially if our lot imposes upon us the necessity of living or working in one of the great cities. But we must remember that the astral and mental worlds are also crowded, very much more so than the physical, although not quite in the same way. Those finer worlds have far greater extension than the physical, and also in them bodies freely interpenetrate one another. So the crowding is not of the same nature, but nevertheless we need to shield ourselves even more strictly on those higher levels than down here. It is not only that on the mental plane there are many millions of people. It is also full of centers of thought on all kinds of subjects, which have been established mostly by men like ourselves. We who are students are earnestly trying to raise ourselves somewhat above the thought of the average man. Therefore, a very large proportion of all this insurgent thought which is so constantly pressing upon us is at a lower level than our own, and we require constantly to guard ourselves against its influence. There is such a vast ocean of thought upon all sorts of utterly unimportant subjects that, unless we rigidly exclude it, we shall find ourselves unable to concentrate upon the higher subjects about which we really wish to think. Therefore, in that respect, we must tile the lodge of the mental body and must exercise great care to whom and to what we open its doors. There are also other respects in which care is necessary on the mental plane. For example, there are many who are cursed with an argumentative nature. Such men throw open the doors of their mental fortress and rush eagerly out to battle on the slightest provocation, or on none at all, quite forgetting that they thereby leave the fortress undefended, so that any thought forces which may happen to be in their neighborhood can enter in and possess it. While they are wasting their strength in wrangling over points of no importance, the whole tone of their mental bodies is being steadily deteriorated by the influences which are flowing into it. Such a man should learn to tile his mental body, so that only those thoughts may enter it which he as an ego really approves. The lodge of the astral body must be tiled also, for it is even more difficult to resist the surging of emotions than the pressure of thoughts. The majority of emotions in the world are ill-directed, being motived by selfishness in someone among its many protean forms, jealousy, envy, pride, anger, or intolerance. To keep our own feelings pure and high, to retain the philosophical calm which is as necessary for right feeling as it is for right thinking, we must sternly tile the lodge against all this vast ocean of unnecessary excitement. Yet, on the other hand, we must take great care that we never fail in true sympathy. Our ears must ever be open to the appeals of suffering, even though we close them resolutely against the meaningless babble of those who pursue only their own ends. In this, as in so many other ways, the middle path of occultism is narrow as the edge of a razor, as we are told in the old Indian books, and we must watch ceaselessly lest on the one hand we are wrecked upon the Scylla of indifference or overwhelmed on the other in the confusion of Charybdis. Even as regards our physical bodies, there is the same reason for strict tiling of the lodge. We do not despise or shun our fellow creatures, though we do shun some of their undesirable haunts. No one who knows anything of the inner side of things will voluntarily approach such a center of ghastly influence as a prize ring, a butcher's shop, or a drinking saloon. Anyone who has even to pass by such places in the course of his daily avocations should make a strong shell round himself that he may not draw into himself even the least trace of their psychic infection. Again, there are many people who are unconscious vampires without being in the least aware of it. They draw out vitality from those who are near them, so that if one sits and talks to such an one for a little while, one feels utterly exhausted and incapable of useful work. If such a person were helped by the strength which he draws from his healthier friends, one might at last regard it as an act of charity to allow him to deplete one. But the fact is that these unfortunate people are themselves incapable of retaining what they take, so that they gain nothing from the transaction, while their hapless victims lose health and strength. In approaching such cases, we shall do well to tile the lodge of our physical bodies by making a strong etheric shell round them, even while we radiate all love and kindly feeling upon the unfortunate vampire. The constantly repeated charge to see that the lodge is close-tiled should bring to our minds a succession of useful warnings, and whenever we hear it we should remember to ask ourselves, is my heart full of the divine love, and have I kept it close-tiled against all evil and foolish thoughts since last I heard these mystic words? So when this question comes now, just before the opening of the lodge, it serves to remind us of the instant necessity of bringing ourselves into the right frame of mind for the wonderful piece of work which we are going to do. The Egyptians taught that this phrase had yet another meaning, though one which scarcely concerns us. They understood the necessity of tiling the world as a whole. Our earth is surrounded by a gaseous atmosphere in which the lightest matter tends to find its way to the top. Hydrogen is the lightest, and what little of it there is in a free state gradually rises to the top of the atmosphere, and some of it escapes and becomes lost in space. That is one of the reasons why the older planets always have less hydrogen than the younger. It leaks away to a certain extent as the planet rushes along through space. That reduces the amount of water on the globe. Thus we find that Mars, which is older than the Earth in proportion to its size, and is in a later period of its life, has slightly more land than water on its surface, while Jupiter and Saturn, which are younger, not in actual age, but in proportion to their size, are almost entirely liquid. There is a great being called the Spirit of the Earth, who uses the Earth as his physical body. He has made his own arrangements to prevent the too rapid escape of his hydrogen, and takes constant care to tile his lodge, but we of course have nothing to do with that. In thinking of all these symbolical meanings, we must not forget the actual tiling of the lodge in which we sit. There are several reasons for our extreme care in this matter. We want to keep the lodge shut not merely to preserve our mysteries from the outer gaze, but because only so may we keep its influence pure and undisturbed. The thought form that is about to be built is a thing very delicately balanced and carefully graduated, and is composed not only of the etheric substances of our material plane, but also of the still finer matter of the emotional and mental worlds. This thought form is constructed for a definite purpose, and if outsiders, whose minds are working along different lines, were present, they would quite unintentionally cause a good deal of friction and destroy the balance and efficacy of the form. It is not that we consider ourselves to be superior to those other people, but that we are training ourselves to think along certain definite lines, and they as a rule arc not. We must also keep prominently in our minds the obligation to preserve absolute secrecy in the outer world about our Masonic meetings and all that takes place at them. There unquestionably is a certain danger of inadvertence in these matters. None are likely even for a moment to contemplate the betrayal of any Masonic secret, nor to exhibit any lack of caution with regard to the wardens and steps which we have solemnly sworn never to reveal. But in other matters there is sometimes incaution. For example, on one occasion I heard some brethren discussing in a tramcar the excellent manner in which a certain junior deacon performed his work in the lodge. This is, of course, no betrayal of any of the secrets, but it contains an element of distinct danger, for it is so easily possible when speaking of the ceremony to make some reference from which an intelligent and inquisitive bystander might deduce more than he ought to know. The entered apprentice sign. After it has been seen that the lodge is close-tiled, the next thing to be done is to see that all is right within, that all present are Freemasons. As a matter of fact, we are already sure of that, for the members of a lodge are well known to each other, and any stranger presenting himself is always carefully proved before he is admitted. But this is the formal proof appointed in the ritual to make assurance doubly sure, so the right worshipful master calls his lodge to order, and all adopt a certain attitude of attention with a steps and sign, both of which are highly symbolical, and have remained unchanged for a very long period. It should be distinctly understood that a man who joins Freemasonry does thereby take a step forward in evolution, and the fact that his identification as a Freemason begins with that steps is a constant reminder and acknowledgement of that. The left finger, because it is nearest to the heart, symbolizes the intuition, while the right finger is supposed to represent intellectual faculty. The meaning of the sign position is therefore obviously that in occult matters intuition always takes precedence over mere reasoning processes. The position adopted is intended to show that reason must always spring from the center of right feeling. Having thus indicated the method of our advancement, we proceed in Comasonry to give the du garde, a contraction of the French Dieu vous garde, which means God keep you, though in English it has been corrupted into du garde. In addition to the thoughts suggested by the steps, this shows us that we learn but to bless, for this position is that which the candidate adopted at the moment when he took his oath. It indicates that the entered apprentice, being himself but a beginner, has as yet neither the right nor the power to give any blessing but that which is prescribed in the volumes of the sacred lore. He may use only the words which are taught to him, for he is not yet in the position to be either a direct channel or a reservoir of the higher force. Then follows a gesture which is at the same time a salutation to God and a declaration of power. The rest of the sign is commonly interpreted as a reminder of the penalty attached to any violation of the entered apprentice obligation, and it is certain that the idea of that penalty has been associated with it from an early period in history, as may be seen by reference to the works of Dr. Albert Churchward. There is, however, yet another more occult meaning for that sign than the explanation usually given. Students of the inner side of man's constitution and of Oriental occultism are aware that there are 7 great force centers in the human body, and that in the course of occult progress all of them have to be opened, developed, and made effective. There are many methods of psychic development, some of which commence with the opening of one center and some with another, but in the scheme advocated in ancient Egypt and continued in Freemasonry, the center indicated by that sign is taken first. So when the Freemason makes that movement, he not only designates the opening up of that center as the special work, from the occult point of view of this degree, but he also commands the aid of the powers in nature connected with and controlled through that center in whatever work he is about to undertake. The gestures and words taught in Freemasonry are not chosen at random. Each has a definite meaning and a definite power in the world of the unseen, quite apart from its signification on the physical plane. Lodges in Europe usually know nothing whatever of all this. Perhaps there may be some in Oriental countries which are better instructed. The 4 centers exist as points of connection at which energy flows from one vehicle or body of a man to another. Anyone who possesses a slight degree of clairvoyance may easily see them in the etheric double, where they show themselves as saucer-like depressions or vortices in its surface. When quite undeveloped, they appear as small circles about 2 inches in diameter, glowing dully in the ordinary man. But when awakened and vivified, they appear as blazing, coruscating saucers much increased in size. We sometimes speak of them as roughly corresponding to certain physical organs. In reality, they show themselves at the surface of the etheric double, which projects slightly beyond the outline of the dense body. If we imagine ourselves to be looking straight down into the bell of a flower of the convolvulus type, we shall get some idea of the general appearance of a chakra. The stalk of the flower in each case springs from a point in the spine, so another view might show the spine as a central stem, from which flowers shoot forth at intervals, showing the opening of their bells at the surface of the etheric body. The 7 centers with which we are at present concerned are indicated in the accompanying illustration. It will be seen that they are situated at the base of the spine, the spleen, the navel or solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the space between the eyebrows, and the top of the head. I have described them fully in The Inner Life, and I have also published a monograph on them called The Chakras with unique colored illustrations. There are several force centers besides these, and there are schools of magic that use them, but the dangers connected with them are so serious that we should consider their awakening as the greatest misfortune. It is precisely in order to avoid the arousing of those lower centers that so much importance was attached in Egypt to the belt or girdle of the apron, and the etheric web which stretched across it. When at all in action, these centers show signs of rapid rotation, and into each of their open mouths, at right angles to the surface of the body, there rushes a force from the higher world, one of those which the great architect of the universe is constantly pouring out through his system. That force is 7-fold in its nature, and all its forms operate in each of these centers, although one of them in each case greatly predominates over the others. Without this inrush of energy, the physical body could not exist. Therefore, the centers are in operation in everyone, although in the undeveloped person they are usually in comparatively sluggish motion, just forming the necessary vortex for the force and no more. On the other hand, they may be glowing and pulsating with living light, so that an enormously greater amount of force passes through them, with the result that there are additional faculties and possibilities open to the man. This divine energy which rushes into each center from without sets up at right angles to itself, that is to say, in the surface of the etheric double secondary forces in undulatory circular motion, just as a bar magnet thrust into an induction coil produces a current of electricity which flows round the coil at right angles to the axis or direction of the magnet. The primary force itself, having entered the vortex, radiates from it again at right angles, but in straight lines, as though the center of the vortex were the hub of a wheel, and the radiations of the primary force its spokes. The number of these spokes differs in the different force centers, and determines the number of waves or petals which each of them exhibits. Because of this, these force centers have often been poetically described in Oriental books as resembling flowers. Each of the secondary forces which sweep round the saucer-like depression has its own characteristic wavelength, just as has light of a certain color, but instead of moving in a straight line as light does, it moves along relatively large undulations of various sizes, each of which is some multiple of the smaller wavelengths within it. The number of undulations is determined by the number of spokes in the wheel, and the secondary force weaves itself under and over the radiating currents of the primary force, just as basket work might be woven round the spokes of a carriage wheel. The wavelengths are infinitesimal, and probably thousands of them are included within one of the undulations. As the forces rush round in the vortex, these oscillations of different sizes, crossing one another in this basketwork fashion, produce the flower-like form to which I have referred. It is, perhaps, still more like the appearance of certain saucers or shallow vases of wavy iridescent glass, such as are made in Venice. All of these undulations or petals have that shimmering iridescent effect, like mother of pearl, yet each of them has usually its own predominant color. In the vivification of the particular center with which this degree of entered apprentice is principally concerned, 3 factors are important. When the center in the emotional body which corresponds to this is awakened, it gives to the man the power of hearing in the subtle world at that level, that is, it causes a development of that sense which, in what is usually called the astral world, produces on our consciousness the effect which on the physical plane we call hearing. So, if the etheric center were fully working, the entered apprentice would be clairaudient as far as the etheric and astral planes. Its slow and partial unfoldment gradually tends to dissipate prejudice in the man, to open his mind to suggestions and, generally speaking, to widen and liberalize his thought. Secondly, the development of the brain largely depends upon the opening up of this center, because it plays an important part in the division and distribution of one of the main streams of vitality which course through the human body. I have already explained the detail of this action in the chakras and the hidden side of things, to which I must refer any reader who desires further information on the subject of vital circulation. Thirdly, another important action of this center deserves our notice, as the especial object of the first degree is the conquest of the passions of the physical body and the development of morality. Among the various kinds of vitality is an orange-red ray, which contains also a certain amount of dark purple. In the normal man, this ray energizes the desires of the flesh and also seems to enter the blood and keep up the heat of the body. But if a man persistently refuses to yield to his lower nature, this ray can by long and determined effort be deflected upwards to the brain, where all three of its constituents undergo a remarkable modification. The orange is raised into pure yellow and produces a decided intensification of the powers of the intellect. The dark red becomes crimson and gradually increases the power of unselfish affection, while the dark purple is transmuted into a lovely pale violet and quickens the spiritual part of man's nature. The man who achieves this transmutation will find that lower desires no longer trouble him, and it is with that consummation in view that the development of the center in which those modifications and transmutations are achieved is so strongly emphasized in the preliminary stages of Freemasonry. The unfoldment of this center is closely associated with the power of paying attention, as well as with the opening of higher forms of hearing. In all occult systems of training, great importance was attached to this in the case of the neophyte. In the school of Pythagoras, the pupils were kept for several years in the order called acoustikoi or hearers. In the mysteries of Mitra, the lowest order was that of the ravens, a name which signifies that they were allowed only to repeat that which they had heard, precisely as a raven or a parrot does, for in all these ancient systems students were strictly forbidden to launch out upon the perilous waters of originality until they were thoroughly grounded in the established principles of philosophy. The sign also evokes or calls to the assistance of the man who uses it a particular class of non-human intelligences of the subtle world. In view of the great influence of this sign of power, all will see the necessity that it should be preserved with the greatest care and secrecy. If it is made wrongly, not in exact form and at the proper place, the effect will be lost. In these matters we are working what is commonly called magic, and that is a dangerous thing to play with and should be taken up only with the greatest seriousness of purpose and precision in work. If a member should make this sign carelessly and without thinking what Ho is doing, he opens himself up to influences of which he is unaware, for which he is unprepared, and things may happen which should not happen. It is this idea which is at the basis of the grossly exaggerated and misleading statement that a man who takes the Holy Sacrament in the Church, while permitting his mind to be full of evil, really eats and drinks damnation to himself. The man who receives the Holy Communion becomes a very high center of radiating force, and is also made receptive to the highest degree. Let him be sure therefore to eliminate evil thoughts, lest such thoughts may draw into him other influences like unto themselves. It is the same with the Masonic sign. He who performs it as a salutation to another opens up his heart towards that person, and that is good, but all should be on guard lest they carelessly open themselves to unpleasant influences which might otherwise have passed them by. When made thus at the opening of our lodge, this sign reminds us that we must put ourselves in a receptive attitude, so that we may obtain the greatest possible benefit from the influx of spiritual force which we are about to invoke. The officers, having thus done our best to prepare ourselves for the work of the evening by the purifying of the lodge room by means of the sensing, by closing our hearts and minds against all distracting thoughts and feelings, and by putting ourselves in a receptive attitude, we now proceed to set in motion the marvelously arranged Masonic machinery by which we can invoke the assistance of non-human beings in our altruistic labors. The method by which this is done is exceedingly ingenious and most skillfully concealed. Man is a complex being, and the rough division into body and soul is not sufficient for scientific working. For the purposes of his evolution, he exists upon 5 of the 7 planes of nature, and has sheaths or bodies built of the matter of the lower of those planes, and principles or constituents within himself which correspond to the higher. This will be made clearer by Figure 13 and its accompanying diagram. Therefore, for our work we need forces of all these different levels, and each officer of a Masonic lodge has, besides his duties on the physical plane, the function of representing one of these levels, and acting as a focus for its special energies. The arrangement made by the founders of Freemasonry is that the enumeration of the officials and the recitation of their positions and duties shall act as an evocation of the devas or angels belonging to and working on those respective levels. The fact that thousands of right worshipful masters have asked the appointed questions without the faintest idea of producing an effect in unseen worlds has not deprived them of angelic assistance which, if they had known of it, would have astounded them beyond expression, and probably even terrified them. So the spirit turns again to the intelligence, and calls on it to formulate the great divisions. Intelligence responds and names the 3 lines through which the force flows, thereby attracting the attention of the angels of those lines. To symbolize that, the right worshipful master asks how many principal officers there are in the lodge, and receives the answer that there are 3. These are the right worshipful master, the worshipful senior warden, and the worshipful junior warden, who represent the divine or spiritual trinity which appears in the deity, and also in man, who is made in the image of that deity. These 3 principles in man are familiar to many students of theosophical psychology under the names of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, which may be rendered into English as the spiritual will, the intuitional love, and the higher intelligence. Then the right worshipful master asks how many assistant officers there are, and is told that these are likewise 3, not including the outer guard or Tyler. These represent the personal constitution of man or his lower self composed of the lower mind, which the senior deacon represents, the emotional nature personified by the junior deacon, and the etheric double of the physical body, for which the inner guard stands. The Tyler represents the dense part of the physical body. The porchway of the lodge is the entrance to the inner world which is invisible to ordinary sight. Therefore the Tyler, who typifies the denser part of the physical body, is the only officer of the lodge who stands outside it, visible to the sight of the profane. All the other 6 principles of the human constitution are beyond physical sight, which deals with only one grade of the matter of the world, and that the lowest and densest. Those principles exist on distinct planes of nature, of ascending degrees of subtlety or fineness of matter. Figure 13 and the diagram connected with it show the 7 principles in man, the planes of nature on which they exist, and the corresponding officers in the Masonic Lodge. The upper triangle, containing the first, second, and third principles, represents the ego or higher self in man, commonly called the soul, who in the course of his long pilgrimage or evolution towards human perfection, takes many incarnations, each of which is called a personality. The lower triangle is a reflection of that higher one in the matter of the lower planes, and it forms with the dense physical body the lower quaternary, which constitutes the personality and lasts through one incarnation. The evolution of man is really the development of the ego or higher self, But in most people at the present stage of human progress that ego may be described as still in his infancy, he has not yet fully awakened to the positive and purposeful life of a man on his own planes, nor has he realized what can be learnt through incarnation in the lower planes. In course of time and many incarnations, the three higher principles gradually unfold themselves, and the man realizes more and more of the divinity which is truly his. Though the principal object of Freemasonry is the collection and distribution of spiritual force for others, it is also deeply concerned with the welfare and progress of the brethren, so its ritual and its teaching clearly indicate the path which man should tread, and offer him the most valuable help as he passes along it. The duties. The list of situations and duties is then rehearsed. It is commonly supposed that the object of this enumeration is to make sure that the facts are thoroughly known to all the brethren, and that all the officials are duly present. It has in reality another and far more important function, as I have explained. Several interesting points of symbolism are brought out in the apparently curious answers which are given with respect to the duties attached to the various offices. The physical body should protect the lodge of a man's soul from the dangers of the outer world, from temptations or evil influences. The tiler is ordered to keep out all cowens and intruders to Freemasonry, and when we recollect that the word cowen is simply the Greek kuon, a dog, and that from time immemorial the dog has been used as a symbol of violent animal passions, we shall readily comprehend what the work and office of the tiler are intended to typify. The etheric double, in the person of the inner guard, also joins to defend the lodge, and is especially under the command of the higher mind or intelligence, the worshipful junior warden, who is concerned with testing all who seek to enter, which shows that it is the duty of the intelligence to discriminate, and to decide what thought or emotion shall receive lodgment within the temple of man. The right worshipful master communicates with the tiler only through the worshipful junior warden and the inner guard, which signifies that spirit does not act directly on dense matter, but through his intelligence impresses himself upon etheric matter, though when he has once sent out his inquiry, the mind may instruct the etheric double to report directly to the right worshipful master on the particular subject. To typify this, in many lodges it is the custom that the worshipful junior warden, in passing on his command, should say, "Brother inner guard, you will see who seeks admission," and report to the right worshipful master. The reflection of the upper triangle in the lower takes place point for point, and there is therefore a sympathetic relation between principles 2 and 5, as well as between 3 and 4 and between 1 and 6. It is with the aid of the emotions, by their purification and development, that the man unfolds principle 2, the intuitional love, so that it is brought into activity in his life. And it is with the aid of the mind that he casts off the 5 fetters to further progress, and so enables the spiritual will to express itself in his life. About these stages and the great initiations that accompany them, I have written in full in the Masters and the Path. They are mentioned here to show why it is that the junior deacon acts between the worshipful senior warden and the worshipful junior warden, and the senior deacon acts between the right worshipful master and the worshipful senior warden. They explain also why it is that the worshipful junior warden takes charge of the entered apprentices, and the worshipful senior warden of the fellow crafts, while the master masons may be considered to be under the immediate charge of the right worshipful master. As the open lodge is a place where the brethren are symbolically undergoing the advanced course of evolution before mentioned, the officers who represent the principles in man must show those principles acting in relation to one another as they do in man in the course of that evolution. The third aspect of the divine being is typified by the worshipful junior warden when he directs the passage from the labor of evolution to the refreshment of periodic rest, while it is the second aspect which is symbolized by the worshipful senior warden when he closes the lodge at the right worshipful master's command. Because when the second aspect of deity withdraws from the forms that he has made, everything is resolved into its primal elements and the universe as such ceases to exist, and so the lodge of the solar system is for the time closed. This is what is called among the Hindus the end of the Manvantara and the beginning of the Pralaya. It is not implied that the officials who happen to hold the positions representing the principles in man in any given lodge are necessarily able to function upon the planes to which they correspond, but it is to be understood that not only the nature spirits, but also the strange half-conscious creatures which we have called elementals, existing on the downward arc of evolution on each of these levels, will and do respond to the invocation which is employed in this closely condensed formula of opening. The enumeration of the officials in answer to the earlier questions of the Right Worshipful Master is in the nature of a call to attention, a call which reverberates through these different kingdoms of nature, and lets devas, nature spirits, and elementals know that an opportunity is about to be offered to them. For that, remember, is the way in which these creatures at all levels look upon such a call. It is one of the chief methods of their evolution to be used in work such as this, and they therefore greatly rejoice to respond. That general enumeration by the wardens is quickly followed by the specific questions addressed to each of the officers, and of these the first inquiry as to their situation in the lodge sets the machinery in motion, acts as a call to a deva of the particular type required, who immediately presents himself and acts as a captain of the nature spirits and elementals who next gather round. The second question and answer in each case, as to the special duty of the officers in question, brings round him these myrmidons of his, and he influences them to arrange themselves as required. For example, when the junior deacon is mentioned, a thrill shoots out through the astral levels, and when he is asked what is his situation in the lodge, a deva, having for his lowest vehicle a body of astral matter, at once steps forward and takes up his position above the head of the junior deacon. At the same time, the attention of a number of nature spirits wearing bodies of astral matter is aroused, and also a great mass of the elemental essence belonging to the third of the great elemental kingdoms is awakened into activity. Then, when the question as to the duties is asked, the deva captain draws round him those astral myrmidons, and arranges them as he needs them, and at the same time seizes upon the floating mass of elemental essence and welds it into thought forms such as he requires to carry out the work that has to be done. In exactly the same way, the senior deacon is represented by a deva captain whose lowest vehicle is built of the matter of the lower subplanes of the mental plane, and employs nature spirits and elemental essence at his own level. It will be noticed that in each case not only the actual situation and duty of the official are defined, but also his relation to other officials, his part in the work as a whole. The deva captains corresponding to the three principal officers are all what are called in the East Arapadevas, and they possess the consciousness and wield the forces of the planes which they respectively represent. It is not easy for us to understand the working of forces at such levels, as they act upon the corresponding principles in man, and those principles are only slightly developed as yet in the majority of human beings. By the time, therefore, that the last of the list of questions and answers has been exchanged, the whole lodge is pulsating with elemental life, all of which is filled with the most intense eagerness to launch itself upon the work in hand, whatever that may be. The elementals and nature spirits of the different levels vary greatly in development and intelligence, some being fully defined and exceedingly active, whereas others are comparatively vague and cloud-like. But a very striking appearance is presented by the lodge when these various groups of beings are gathered together, each group showing its distinctive color and floating over the head of the official who is its physical plane representative. All this taking place while the lodge is still in semi-darkness, lit only by the 3 candles and the sacred fire. It is to this condition that the Right Worshipful Master refers when he says, "Our lodge being thus duly formed." In the case of the lower officers, at any rate, it requires but a slight development of clairvoyance to see these creatures floating in their appointed places, each group making a sort of luminous sphere or cloud. This cloud is violet-gray in the case of the inner guard, crimson for the junior deacon and yellow for the senior deacon. It is not so easy to define the hues of the 3 principal officers, for each of them seems to carry something of all possible colors, but it may perhaps be said that a golden hue predominates in the worshipful junior warden's sphere, and a strong electric blue in that of the worshipful senior warden. The right worshipful master's light globe is the brightest of all, glowing equally with rose, gold, blue, and green, each of which flashes out into prominence at certain points of the ceremony. It is through these deva representatives of the various officers that the building of the thought form and the outpouring of the force is really done. But on the physical plane, the officer of the lodge should also participate in the work to the extent of his power. If he reaches upward to his deva representative and allows the force to flow freely through him, blending his will with it as it flows, his higher principles will become one with that deva, and he will not only be an excellent channel for the divine force, but will himself be greatly helped and strengthened in the doing of the work. The opening. The deva representative of the right worshipful master is a highly developed and very capable seventh-ray angel, and the moment that he arrives with his cohort of assistant angels and elementals, he takes full charge of the whole of the proceedings. The captains of all the other little groups spring to attention, and everything is at once made ready for the supreme moment of the opening of the lodge. The right worshipful master, having declared that his lodge is duly formed and that he stands there as its head and representative, turns to express his gratitude to the great architect of the universe for this, and then offers up an earnest wish that the work of the evening, having thus begun in order, may be continued in harmony and closed in peace. To this his whole lodge replies with a ringing response, like the cheer of an army. So mote it be. Mote is an old Anglo-Saxon form of may, and this expression is the Masonic Amen. But just as Amen is often interpreted so may it be, so is this splendid Masonic expression often degraded to the level of a mere assent or pious wish. And again, just as Amen is not a wish but an assertion, the most sacred oath of ancient Egypt, which none would ever dare to break. By Amen it shall be so, so is this Masonic exclamation to be taken as the strongest affirmation, so shall it be. Not, we pray or we hope that it may be so, but we shall make it so. This is shown by the emphatic outstretching of the right hand at the level of the shoulder, this being a well-known sign of power and command. Immediately after this, the right worshipful master, acting in the name of the great architect of the universe, declares the lodge duly open, and all the lights are turned fully on. It is not only the physical light which leaps forth at this moment, for as the right worshipful master says the opening words, his deva representative also lifts his staff, and all the 7 groups of assistant spirits, which until now have been seen even by clairvoyant sight as merely luminous clouds, flash out into their full brilliancy and their natural beauty of color. At once also each group is connected by a line of living light with the physical official over which it hovers, and through this line its force is poured down upon him whenever he is called upon to take part in the ceremony. The deva representative usually remains floating above the regular situation of the official, but as the latter moves about the lodge in the course of his work, the line of light never leaves him for a moment, though it becomes more vivid during his activity. Just before the lodge is opened, the immediately past master is escorted by the 2 deacons with crossed wands to the altar, where he kneels and awaits the exact moment of opening. As the right worshipful master utters the word open, the immediately past master opens the volumes of the sacred lore, and arranges upon its pages the square and the compasses, thus displaying what we esteem the 3 great emblematical lights in Freemasonry simultaneously with the physical illumination. It is the immediately past master who thus brings the symbolical light to the lodge, just as it was he who gave the physical light from the sacred fire to the senior deacon, because he represents the silent watcher, the influence which sees that everything is correctly done and stands ready always to supply anything that is needed. He has reached the light in its fullest sense. He has done his work and is therefore in a position to help others. It should be specially noted that he should open the sacred volume at random, not searching for any particular passage. It is the whole book that is given to us to illumine our minds, not only this verse or that. It will be found most convenient to open it somewhere about the middle. To show that the sacred volume is here being used as a symbol, the immediate past master solemnly recites the ancient formula quoted by St. John the Evangelist at the beginning of his Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We all know that the Greek translated in this text as word is in the original logos, and so the opening of the volumes of the sacred lore typifies the manifestation of the logos at the beginning of a solar system, while the compasses and the signs show further that he manifests himself as spirit and matter, for there is nothing which is not God. To indicate that the second person or aspect of the logos is about to descend into his universe, the column of the worshipful senior warden is now erected, and that of the worshipful junior warden is laid down. The brooding of the Holy Spirit over the waters of chaos is now no longer the only divine activity. The groundwork is laid, and the active life of the system is to begin. The tracing board which indicates the plan of its activity is now exposed, and the nature of that activity is indicated by the fact that we commence it with a hymn of praise to the great architect of the universe, during the singing of which the brethren should pour out all the love and devotion of which they are capable. In those lodges which use a portrait of the head of our august temple and fraternity, it is just before the singing of this hymn that that portrait is unveiled, all the brethren turning towards it and saluting. In instant response to this salutation, the great adept projects a thought form which is an exact image of himself, just as at a higher level the Lord Christ projects that thought form which is called the angel of the presence at every celebration of the Holy Eucharist. So fully is this thought form a part of the head of our august temple and fraternity that the lodge has the benefit of his presence and his blessing just as though he stood there in physical form. The Deva representative of the right worshipful master bows low before the head of his ray, and leaves the direction of affairs in his hands. It will be seen that those of us who know of the existence of this great adept, and of his keen interest in our work, have a great advantage, but it must not be forgotten that every regularly constituted Masonic lodge is in charge of a seventh-ray angel, however little the brethren may know about the matter. I have explained how at the moment of the opening of the lodge all the assistant angels, nature spirits and elemental creatures and their Deva captains flash out into brilliancy, and stand round ready to spring forward at the word of command. To say that they are ready is far from expressing the fact. They are overflowing with eagerness, like dogs straining at a leash. And now comes the moment for which they have been waiting, for immediately after the return of the immediate past master to his seat and the display of the tracing board by the senior deacon comes the opening hymn, with the first note of which the superphysical entities burst into tumultuous yet ordered activity. The hymn itself, or rather the devotion and enthusiasm with which we sing it, provides them with the material for their building, and immediately they are all working away at its erection, each at his own level, and with the materials belonging to that level with which the brethren supply him. In the opening procession, the right worshipful master and his officers have already constructed the lower part of the cella, or interior chamber of the temple, shutting in the whole of the mosaic pavement and charging it heavily with magnetism. These creatures pounce upon that first of all and rapidly make its walls both thicker and higher, the greater ones reinforcing its magnetism by filling it with the splendid power of their respective levels. Again, with lightning-like rapidity they spread a ceiling over the whole of the lodge, and from that ceiling, beginning at the edges, just within the walls of the physical lodge, they drop supporting columns from above downwards like the roots of a banyan tree, one of them surrounding each of the non-official brethren. It will thus be seen that our thought form is very nearly a reproduction of a Greek temple, the rows of columns which support its tremendously heavy roof being outside the central chamber, which is the only part of the temple fully enclosed. The accompanying picture may help to make this clear, and we give at the same time in Plate 5 a drawing of an existing Greek temple for the sake of comparison. The mere outline of the temple is always finished during the singing of the opening hymn, but in certain circumstances friezes and other decorations may be added later on under the direction of the controlling angel. It will thus be seen why the unofficial brethren who sit at the sides of the lodge are sometimes spoken of as the columns, and some light is also thrown on an ancient text which runs, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out." Incidentally, we see how necessary it is that the brethren should put their hearts and souls into the words that they sing or say, for upon their efforts in this direction depends the amount of material provided for our superphysical fellow workers, and consequently the massiveness and richness of the thought form which they build. All through the ceremony that follows, whatever it may be, the Deva representatives of the three principal officers continue to pour into the cella their beneficent influence, and though its strongest force is reserved for those who enter upon the mosaic pavement as candidates, it also somehow filters through the roof and down the columns upon all who are present. The entered apprentice knocks at the moment of opening the lodge. The right worshipful master also gives the entered apprentice knocks. Knocks in Freemasonry have a double significance and a very definite use. The latter is based on the fact that they are a recognized method of communication with certain orders of earth spirits whose attention is attracted by them, whose eager service is at once at the disposal of those who are duly qualified to summon them, though they will take no notice of a call from one who has not been properly introduced to them by initiation into the entered apprentice degree. Their main use in the ceremony is to create an atmosphere, the atmosphere appropriate to the degree which is being worked, and in that special work they become extraordinarily proficient, answering instantly to the call of the knocks with military promptness and precision, so that even when the lodge is being raised or lowered by the short method, they are able to produce the required changes as quickly as the commands can be issued. This generation of the proper atmosphere is one of the most important special features of Freemasonry, indispensable to really efficient working. Anyone who is at all sensitive to such influences may feel the change which takes place when we pass from one degree to another, but only those who have opened the sight of the soul can see the variations of color, or watch the busy workers who are so energetic in producing them. The Deva captains of the three principal officers take charge of this important part of the work: the worshipful junior warden of the servants of the first degree, the worshipful senior warden of those of the second, and the right worshipful master of those of the third. But the earth spirits themselves obey the call of the knocks, appearing at the first round and unobtrusively returning to their normal haunts when another battery announces that their work is done. The knocks of the closing correspond to the Ite, Missa Est of the Catholic Church. It may be noted that similar creatures are fond of announcing their presence by knocks at a spiritualistic séance. The knocks of the first degree have also a moral significance, indicating that the entered apprentice has three planes in front of him to conquer: the physical body with its impulses coming from the past, the astral with its strong desires and emotions, and the mental with its curiosity and waywardness. With each of these, every man in the course of his evolution has a twofold work to do. First, he must conquer it, govern its impulses and bring them into a state of obedience to the soul within, and secondly, he must develop it as a positive, well-trained, useful instrument for his service. The entered apprentice is supposed to have conquered the physical body before entering into Masonry. Without that he could not be well and worthily recommended for admission, but he has still to develop it, and while he is doing that, B is supposed to be gaining complete control of his astral nature. That is the special work of this degree as far as self-development is concerned, though of course the Mason is trying to perfect himself in every way all the time. The knocks of the second degree indicate that the physical work is complete, and that the fellow craft has still two planes to conquer. He is engaged in making his astral body into a perfect instrument for the expression of high emotion, and is at the same time learning to gain control of his mind. In this stage, a Mason should be making every day some advances in Masonic knowledge, till presently the mind will no longer be wayward and fickle, but controlled. At this point he will pass on to the 3rd degree, and then the knocks indicate that he has but one plane to conquer, has but to perfect the mind as an instrument in the service of the higher self. This work will go on for as many years as are necessary before he passes through the chair. From the above it will be seen that there are 4 stages in craft masonry, 3 degrees, and then a further attainment when the master mason becomes an installed master. There is a similarity between these stages and those which have been prescribed in the Christian Church, although one is at a much higher level than the other. This is shown in the following diagram. In the Church, certain people are set apart as priests, but they have to pass through the earlier stages before reaching that position. First, the man must be a subdeacon. His business then is to prepare himself for the great surgical operation which takes place at the diaconate, when he is definitely joined with the world teacher, in a way which has been fully explained in the science of the sacraments. In the stage of the subdiaconate, which corresponds somewhat to the entered apprentice, the man is supposed to learn to control himself perfectly. In the next grade, during the time of the diaconate, he has to learn. He is preparing himself for the work of the priesthood, just as the fellow craft is preparing himself for the work of the master mason. As I have said in speaking of the Dugard, the power of blessing of the entered apprentice is contained within the book from which he learns. He may use only the words of the book, and must not go beyond them. He is not himself yet a direct channel for the divine power, so he puts the book between his hands. But the fellow craft puts one hand on the Bible and raises the other in the form of a sign. He corresponds to the deacon because he is a channel linked with the Christ, but only that which comes down and pours through him may he give. He is not yet himself filled with grace and power, but he is able to act as a channel. His holding of the left hand in that way corresponds, though at a lower stage, with the bishop's holding his crozier in the left hand. He is drawing down divine power through that highly magnetized staff, while he is pouring it out on the people with the other hand. It is the same gesture, though of course in the case of the bishop it is far more highly specialized. Then the master mason puts both his hand on the Bible. He is supposed, when he has attained that high degree, to be in a position of power, to be filled with the energy which has been poured into him in the symbolical death and rising again. Therefore he can give that energy. He may give a blessing to other people just as a priest does, and as the priest has authority to administer certain sacraments, so is the master mason qualified to accept office in the lodge. Still, neither the master mason nor the priest can convey his power or authority to anyone else. The bishop alone has power to ordain priests or to consecrate other bishops, and only the installed master is able to initiate, pass, and raise masons, and to create other installed masters. Both the bishop and the installed master have also the power to give a fuller blessing than the priest or the master mason can bestow. Thus there is a succession of installed masters in Masonry, just as there is a succession of bishops in the Church. In the science of the sacraments I have explained something of the inner meaning of the apostolic succession, the method designed by the Christ for handing down the spiritual powers of the Catholic Church. It will be seen that we have a similar succession in Masonry, extending back to the priests of the mysteries of ancient Egypt and beyond. There is a further analogy between the degrees of Freemasonry and the orders of the Church, for just as the clergy of the Church are linked in various degrees of connection with the head of the Church, the Lord Christ himself, and with the reservoir of power which he has set apart for the celebration of the sacraments, so are the initiates of the various degrees in Freemasonry linked according to their rank with the head of our august temple and fraternity, and with the reservoir of power set apart for the work of the craft. Every Freemason has a certain touch with him, but the first great link directly with him is given in the degree of installed master, and closer links still are conferred in the higher degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, so that the earnest Mason becomes a veritable outpost of his consciousness, a channel of his power and a minister of his will. Such brethren act as his representatives in their lodges and chapters, and have the right to give his blessing according to their Masonic rank. It is a matter of deep regret that so few of our modern brethren realize in the least the sacredness of their office, and the heavy responsibility laid upon them to use their power without thought of self in the service of the world. There are, however, considerable differences between the methods of transmission in these two great sacramental systems. It is recognized in Catholic theology and confirmed by occult investigation that the spiritual powers given at ordination are invariably conferred, provided only that the bishop be in the line of the apostolic succession, that he have the intention to confer holy orders, and that the recipient have the intention to receive them, and that the laying on of hands take place according to the ancient tradition. The particular beliefs of the bishop and the candidate do not affect the validity of the sacrament in the slightest degree, nor will it be withheld if they are out of communion with any particular branch of the Church, or even if they are persons of questionable moral worth. The Lord Christ, out of his great love for his Church, is willing to overlook the human frailties of the minister, so that his flock may be fed. But the transmission of power in Masonry seems to he by no means so unalterably fixed, probably because of the fact that Masonry is a secret order and is not therefore in direct relation with the outer world. The whole scheme of transmittal is much more elastic than that of the Church. Although it would appear that the succession both of installed masters and sovereign grand inspectors general has been to a large extent handed down on the physical plane, it is by no means necessary that it should be so handed down, and the sacramental powers may be introduced or withheld as the head of our august temple and fraternity sees fit. When a clandestine meeting is held, even though a duly qualified installed master be present, the inner recognition is not given, and the powers are not conveyed. Two such cases of the withholding of inner recognition are within my personal experience. In the Church, a priest can anywhere and by himself perform a sacrament, and a bishop can also pass on his power at his own discretion. But in craft Masonry the unit is the lodge, and the presence of a number of brethren is essential to the validity of the rites, except when degrees are conferred by communication by one who has due authority. It is said that 3 rule a lodge, 5 hold a lodge, and 7 or more make it perfect. In making this comparison between Masonic degrees and church orders, I am not for a moment asserting that the powers conferred upon the many in the degrees of Freemasonry are in any sense equal to those bestowed upon a few carefully selected and prepared candidates in the major orders of the Church. I wish only to draw attention to a series of curious correspondences between the two systems, too numerous and remarkable to be due to mere coincidence. Masonry does give powers commensurate with those appertaining to the Church, but only in its very highest degrees, and to the very few. Chapter 6. Initiation. The candidate. When any member of the general public wishes to become a Freemason, he usually applies to some friend whom he knows to be a member of the craft. This friend will probably introduce him to the secretary of the lodge, who then supplies the applicant with certain papers. The candidate will then find that he is expected to give some particulars with regard to himself, his age, his occupation in life, his reason for wishing to join the craft, etc. Also, in Comasonry the following notice will be handed to him. The candidate should clearly understand the obligations he takes upon himself in joining the order. These obligations are of the most serious and solemn character, and he is expected to discharge them honorably. The candidate undertakes to try to lead a noble and upright life, and to work at the improvement of his character. He undertakes to attend regular meetings of the lodge, unless prevented by cause sufficiently grave. These are usually held once or twice a month, except at holiday seasons. Sometimes emergency meetings are called for special work, but attendance at these is not obligatory. The true Mason, however, regards it not only as a solemn duty, but also as a great privilege to attend his lodge, realizing that, though the lodge exists to help its members, it has a far greater and wider function in shedding the spiritual influence of Masonry upon the world. By his regular attendance at the meetings, he is definitely participating in that great work. His progress in the order will depend upon the zeal and assiduity which he shows in this service. He undertakes to remain in the order and in his mother lodge for at least 3 years. He is permitted, after initiation, to visit other lodges, and after he is a Master Mason to join other lodges, if he so desires, but he must not leave the mother lodge under the specified period. It is to the mother lodge that he owes allegiance and the duty of loyal cooperation. Where there is more than one lodge near his place of residence, the candidate should ask his introducers for information regarding the work of the several lodges, so that he may be sure of entering the lodge whose work and members are likely to be most congenial to him. The candidate is bound to true Masonic secrecy and caution concerning Freemasonry and the affairs of the order, and this promise is to be regarded as binding for all time, even if he leaves the order. Divisions of the ceremony. We now come to the consideration of the ceremony by which the candidate is admitted to Freemasonry, a ceremony which is commonly called his initiation. We must recognize from the beginning that this ceremony is no mere form, first because it produces definite inner effects, and secondly, because it contains a great deal of most valuable symbology, the understanding and application of which will be of great moment in the candidate's future life. As I have stated earlier in the book, one chief object of Freemasonry is to train its members for the work which they have to do in the world, and therefore to cultivate within them the qualities necessary for that work. The various degrees in Masonry are all stages in that training, and in each stage not only is certain definite education given, but also definite powers are conferred. It is to be feared that through ignorance of these facts many Masons make but little real progress, for unless the developments initiated in each degree by the ceremony of admission are duly understood and put into practice by the candidate, he is in no true sense prepared to pass on to a higher stage, or to take advantage of the opportunities which that in turn puts before him. The outer ceremony confers certain powers and opens up certain possibilities, but it remains for the neophyte to develop them and make use of them. Some neophytes take the hints offered to them, and accordingly make progress. Others understand little of the inner requirements, and so are only temporarily affected. The very word initiation is derived from initium, a beginning, and that is precisely what it is intended to be, the beginning of a new and higher life. But it is not enough to begin, one must also continue. In the Buddhist teaching it is said that in each of the great steps which are the true initiations there are 4 stages the way, in which the neophyte is mastering the lessons of his new step, casting off the fetters which have previously bound him, finding himself at his new level, and learning how to use the powers conferred upon him. The fruit, when he finds the results of his action in so doing showing themselves more and more. The consummation, the period when, the results having culminated, he is able to fulfill satisfactorily the work belonging to the step on which he now firmly stands. The readiness, meaning the time when he is seen to be in a fit state to receive the next initiation. We see, therefore, that initiation involves something more than the mere outward ceremony, more even than the upliftment of the inner nature which accompanies that ceremony. All that is but the gateway at the entrance of a path along which we may proceed as quickly or as slowly as we will. In considering this ceremony of initiation to the stage of the entered apprentice, it will be useful to regard it from 3 aspects or points of view. As an impressive ceremony of admission, as a preparation for and an indication of the life which the man must lead and the work which he must do while in the degree to which it admits him, as putting in a powerful and effective symbolical form the teaching which it is one of the purposes of this degree to impress upon him. When we examine the ceremony in detail, I think we shall find that every incident in it falls under one or other of these three heads. Thinking of the ritual from the point of view of a ceremony of admission into the order, it seems naturally to divide itself into three parts. The central point of the ceremony, the climax of our effort, is the definite admission into the order, the point at which a certain center or chakra is opened, a certain potentiality of power given. All that precedes that in the ceremony is of the nature of preparation for that point. All that follows it is in the nature of explanation of what has been done, or of exhortation as to how the power can best be developed and used. All through the ceremony everything is arranged so that the candidate may receive the greatest possible benefit from the forces which are being outpoured, and that is the principal object of the very curious preparation upon which Masonry has always insisted, even before the candidate is allowed to enter the lodge. Preparation of the candidate. Before his admission he is divested of all medals and valuables, is hoodwinked, and has his right arm bared, left breast bared and left knee bared, and his right heel slipshod. All Masonic bodies agree in viewing the continuance of this conventional form of preparation as a matter of the greatest importance and give as their reason for this the practice of ancient times. All Masonic bodies agree in viewing the continuance of this conventional form of preparation as a matter of the greatest importance, and give as their reason for this the practice of ancient times. It was a rule among the Jews, says a treatise connected with the Talmud, that no man shall go into the temple with his staff, nor with shoes on his feet, nor with his outer garment, nor with money tied up in his purse. The very specific character of the preparation, which is different in each degree, points, however, not to a general rule of this kind, but to real knowledge of the occult physiology of the process of initiation on the part of those who originated the method which has been so faithfully preserved. Certain forces are sent through the candidate's body in a definite manner during the ceremony, and especially at the moment when he is created, received and constituted and entered apprentice Freemason. Certain parts of the lodge have been very heavily charged with magnetic force, especially in order that the candidate may absorb as much as possible of this force. It will be remembered that in the process of censing the lodge a beehive-shaped structure was erected in front of the pedestal of each of the principal officers, and the cella or enclosed central space, founded upon the mosaic pavement and including the altar, is the most highly magnetized of all. The first object of this curious method of preparation is to expose to this influence those various parts of the body which are especially used in the ceremony. Thus, the right arm is made bared because the candidate must use that, as soon as he is taught to extend it in the sign of power which accompanies the asseveration. So moted B, it is also said to be a token of sincerity, to show that the candidate has no weapon about him. The left breast is made bared because upon it is received the touch of the point of the sword on entering the lodge. The masculine craft adds as another reason that they are hereby assured that their candidate is not a woman in disguise. The left knee is that upon which he kneels when he is received, so it also is made bared, and the right heel is slipshod because that must touch the floor when he holds the right knee in the form of a square. The left knee and the right heel are his supports or points of contact with the floor at the moment of his admission. Another reason sometimes given for the right heel being slipshod is that this is in accordance with the ancient Jewish custom when a man was taking upon himself an obligation or making an agreement. In ancient Egypt there was yet another reason for these preparations. For a weak current of physical electricity was sent through the candidate by means of a rod or sword with which he was touched at certain points. It is not practical here to say more about this part of the ceremony, except that it is concerned with the stimulation of an etheric current in the spine that is known to the Hindu occultists under the name of the Ida Nadi. It will be more fully described in explaining the ceremony of raising. It is partly on the same account that at this first initiation the candidate is deprived of all metals, since they may very easily interfere with the flow of the currents. Very great importance has always been attached to this part of the preparation, and the strictest adherence to the rule is necessary. The vigilance of comasonic officials in this respect should be even greater than is necessary in the masculine craft, because in the intricacies of a lady's costume it is more easily possible to overlook some breach of the regulation. Most kinds of hairpins must of course be rigorously excluded. The same caution applies to hooks and eyes and many types of buttons and garters. Our Indian brethren need to exercise care with regard to the embroidery on dhotis and saris. We have sometimes encountered sentimental objections on the part of ladies to the removal of the wedding ring, and I think that similar difficulties sometimes exist in India with regard to bangles and other ornaments. Direction on this point was asked from the head of our august temple and fraternity, and he said very definitely that modification of this rule should not be permitted, though he also said that in several cases in the past, where an official was ignorant of the stringency of the rule, he had himself performed an act of healing which validated the initiation. Otherwise, he requires its strict fulfillment, and intimates that those who feel unable to comply with this requirement should not join the comasonic order. We had a case in which a man inadvertently went through the ceremony with a gold charm or metal sewn into the lining of one of his garments. This was not remembered until the conclusion of the ceremony, which of course had to be repeated from the beginning. There was another instance in which by an unworthy subterfuge a feminine candidate succeeded in retaining a wedding ring until the conclusion of the ceremony and, when this was discovered, absolutely refused to have it removed that the initiation might be repeated. The question then arose as to the status of this candidate, who had irregularly received certain secrets. The decision of the head of our august temple and fraternity was clear and uncompromising, that in spite of the ceremony of initiation she was not a Mason, and could not in any way be recognized as such. There have been cases in my mother lodge in which it has been found necessary to file through a tightly fitting ring, but that can easily be done by a skillful operator, who is also able to restore the ring quite perfectly to its previous appearance. Obviously, care must also be taken with regard to spectacles and eyeglasses. We are given to understand that gold and silver in teeth are not objectionable, as they are a permanent part of the person. Another suggestion which has been made as to the meaning of this stringent prohibition is that the wearing of metals would render the candidate ceremonially unclean, therefore his initiation would be null and void, so that it would be necessary to remove the metal and to repeat the ceremony. Some writers have supposed that this feeling that metals are to a certain extent impure probably dates from the close of the Stone Age. The same idea of conservatism dictated that only a stone knife might be used in the offering of sacrifices or in the rite of circumcision. This part of the preparation is also supposed to refer to the fact that at the building of King Solomon's temple there was not heard within its precincts the sound of any axe, hammer, or tool of iron, as the stones were fully prepared in the quarries and were laid in their places by means of wooden mauls. That the candidate should enter without any valuables on his person is symbolic of the fact that he is going into a brotherhood in which money, titles, and other distinctions of the outer world do not count. The rich man leaves his rank and state outside the mason's door. The poor man meets his true respect upon the checkered floor. The Freemason is equal to a prince, but brother to a beggar, if he be worthy. In the lodge this brotherhood is seen in the entire absence of any favoritism. Everyone who becomes a master mason may in due course rise to the position of master of the lodge. There is also a personal side to the matter. He must be poor, that is to say, he must not be dependent upon external wealth and possessions, for they will not avail him in the progress of the evolution that he is now taking in hand. On the contrary, great possessions may be a hindrance to him, unless he is a man of such strong character that he is entirely their master, and can take them up and put them down at will, and can see them come and go without elation or sorrow. Strictly speaking, he who enters on the occult path owns nothing at all, though he may have to handle great wealth and large interests. He cannot feel them as his personal possessions, to be held for the delight or benefit of his separate self. He deals with them only as a steward on behalf of God in the service of man. He has in that sense given all that he had to the poor, and has thus at the same time become one of the poor himself. The candidate is blindfolded for the obvious reason that he shall not see the lodge or any of its decorations or arrangements till he has taken the solemn oath on no account to reveal them to any outsider. Until the oath is taken, the candidate is at liberty to withdraw. There have been cases in which the candidate objected to the form of the oath offered to him, and declined to proceed further. In such rare instances he may honorably be permitted to withdraw, and he will be conducted from the lodge still blindfolded, so that no question can arise of his disclosing anything that should be kept secret. As soon as that solemn oath has been taken, the very first step is to remove the handkerchief from his eyes. If at any time subsequent to that the candidate should wish to withdraw, he is of course nevertheless bound by the oath of secrecy which he has taken. The hoodwinking typifies the state of mental darkness of the candidate. The man in the street thinks that he sees and knows, but the candidate must now realize that that is not so. He begins to understand the words of an ancient sage, who said that when it is day with ordinary men it is night to the wise, but when it is night to ordinary men it is day to the wise. What looks to men in the world like light and knowledge, he sees to be ignorance and darkness, and where all is dark to them he sees. It seems sad that so little of the true knowledge vital to the well-being and progress of the human soul is taught in our schools at the present day. Much time and energy are expended in trying to make a boy a good classical or mathematical scholar. Far less attention seems to be devoted to making him a man of noble life, an honorable, unselfish, loyal, and upright citizen. Therefore, about many of the most important points in life we are truly left to walk in darkness, and it is precisely from that particular sort of darkness that Freemasonry delivers its candidates. Therefore, they symbolically acknowledge the existence of the darkness, and are willing to go forward through it in search of light. Moreover, as is said in the mystic charge, it also symbolizes the blank unconsciousness which follows the passage through the gateway of death, ere the subtler part of the physical body has fallen away. The candidate wears a cord about his neck, with the loose end hanging in front, and he is admitted to the lodge upon the point of a naked sword pressed to his left breast. These two things typify the fact that in life men have responsibilities and limitations, both of which must be taken into account by every wise man. There can be no turning back from the former, nor any impetuous rushing forward regardless of the latter. Here again we have a symbol of the two great laws of dharma and karma. Through dharma, the use of the powers that we have in the duties of life that those powers make us fit to perform, there is growth or evolution from within. Through karma, the outer environment that comes to us as the result of the actions that we have done in past lives, come opportunities for progress and sometimes obstacles, which, however, when rightly faced, increase our inward strength. As Emerson put it, man learns in this world through tuition and intuition, both externally and internally he is being taught. On the occult path, it is still more important that the aspirant shall proceed without impetuosity or reluctance, without rashness or fear. Just as one wishing to walk on a line must go neither too slowly nor too fast, so must the candidate proceed on the path which is narrow as the edge of a razor. Festina lente might well be taken as his motto. It should be noted that the symbolism of the cord requires that whoever conducts the candidate in these earlier stages of the ceremony should in all cases lead him by it, as well as grasp him by the hand or elbow. It also, as well as the hoodwink, has been described as symbolical of the bondage of ignorance under which the candidate remains until the light of Masonry shines upon him. This emblem of the cord has also been considered to typify the psychic umbilical cord, the connecting thread of matter which joins the etheric double to the dense physical body when the former is temporarily partially withdrawn from the latter, the silver cord mentioned in a well-known biblical passage as being definitely loosed at death. Brother Wilmshurst tells us that silver is the technical esoteric term for psychical substance, as gold is for spiritual and iron or brass for physical. He suggests also that the cord is intended to hint to us that all the true and higher initiations take place out of the physical body, the inner preparation. But little is said in the ritual about the other and even more important aspect of the necessary preparation of a candidate for initiation into Freemasonry, the inner and spiritual part of it. At a later stage, when the neophyte is about to pass on into a higher degree, he is asked, "Where were you first prepared to be made a Freemason?" And the beautiful and suggestive answer which is put into his mouth is, "In my heart." In one of the masculine rituals, the right worshipful master reminds the candidate that internally he was prepared to be made a Mason in his heart by having a preconceived good opinion of the order, a wish to be ranked among its members, and a desire for knowledge. Furthermore, in the first lecture the questioner asks, "What come you here to do?" And the answer is, "To learn to rule and subdue my passions, and to make further progress in Masonry." Before the door is opened to his knock, the candidate has to convince the inner guard that he is rightly prepared in his mind and heart, as well as in external form. He comes, announces the Tyler, of his own free will and accord, humbly soliciting to be admitted to the mysteries and privileges of ancient Freemasonry, and hopes to obtain them by the help of God, and the testimony of good report, being free. No man can tread the occult path on the inspiration of another. He must feel within himself the impulse, a lack of satisfaction with the things that the world of ordinary life can give, an inner hunger for the things of the spirit, which among the Hindus is called mumukshava. It is a path on which external things do not stand by to support the traveler, who has nothing but his own inner strength to sustain him and urge him on. Though this is so, it is also happily true that when the man makes this effort for himself, he does find a response from within, and so he is justified in saying that he hopes to obtain initiation by the help of God as well as by the tongue of good report. He solicits humbly because he is looking upwards to the light. His attitude is the exact opposite of that of the man of pride, who is content to look downwards, enjoying the comparison of his own greatness with the littleness of inferior persons and things that come within his supercilious vision. Humility is the possession of the man of ideals, who is never self-satisfied, because he regards always that which is above. It is thus the key to the gateway of the upward path. The humble man will not think that he achieves his triumph by his own proud prowess alone, but, realizing that all strength is the divine strength, he will recognize that, like the heroes of old, he is but employing the powers with which he has been endowed from on high, just as Arjuna in the battle of Kurukshetra used the celestial weapons presented to him by Shiva during his pilgrimage in the Himalayas, just as Perseus, in the fearful adventure which he undertook against the Gorgon, used the helmet lent to him by Pluto, the shield or mirror of Pallas Athene, and the wings of Mercury, just as King Arthur received the mystic sword Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake. And even Christ said, "I do nothing of myself, but as my Father hath taught me, and he that sent me is with me." The tongue of good report, it is said, has already been heard in his favor in the lodge. This phrase has a double sense. It may undoubtedly be taken as referring to the testimony to the candidate which has already been given by his proposer and seconder. But it has also another and more esoteric meaning, which has been beautifully expressed by Brother Wilmshurst in Masonic initiation as follows. This does not mean of good reputation. It means that on being tested by the initiating authorities, he must be found spiritually responsive to the ideals aimed at and ring true, giving back a good sound or report like a coin that is tapped to determine its genuineness. In the wonderful Egyptian rituals in the Book of the Dead, one of the titles always found accorded to the initiate was true of voice. This is the same thing as our reference to possessing the tongue of good report. It does not mean that he was incapable of falsity and hypocrisy, which goes without saying, but that his very voice revealed his inherent spirituality and his own speech reflected and was colored by the divine word behind it. The vocal and heart nervous centers, the guttural and the pectoral, as we say, are intimately related physiologically. Purity or impurity of heart modifies the tonal quality and moral power of one's speech. The voice of the real initiate or saint is always marked by a charm, a music, an impressiveness, and a sincerity absent in other men. For he is true of voice, he possesses the tongue of good report. Every man pronounces his own true name, just as he has his own odor materially, by which a bloodhound can track him, so has he his sound spiritually, and those who can hear that sound of his in the inner worlds know where he stands on the ladder of evolution, and what he can and cannot do. The distinctive sound which every man has is often spoken of as his chord. Each of his vehicles contains vibrations of all sorts of different rates, and these blend together so as to make for each vehicle a certain complex sound, the average sound of the whole vehicle, somewhat analogous to the composite photographs which we sometimes see, in which a number of faces are superimposed upon the same plate. Such composite notes are produced by each of the vehicles, etheric, astral, and mental, and these taken together make up the distinctive chord of the man, by which those who can hear it can always identify him. This is sometimes called the occult name of the personality. The true name which is first heard at his initiation as an adept is that belonging to other and far higher vehicles. Much ancient magic took its power from the knowledge of such names. Thus it is his own knock, his own report, made with the tongue of the inner self, that opens for the man the way into the true lodge. The stipulation that the candidate must be a free man takes us back in thought to those ancient days in which a large majority of men were not free, in which vast hosts of people lived in the condition of serfs or slaves. We need not think of that great class as being necessarily ill-treated or degraded. Many of them were men of other races, whose fate it had been to be taken prisoners in battle. They were consequently quite often of just as good birth as their captors. In ancient Egypt, at any rate, this fact was fully recognized, and it was by no means infrequent for a slave to marry into the family of his master, when of course he became at once a free man. It was, however, the immemorial tradition in times of old that only one who held the status of a free man could be admitted into a Masonic lodge. The definition now given of the man who is a fit and proper person to be made a Mason is that he shall be just, upright, and free, of mature age, sound judgment, and strict morals, and this enumeration of qualities gives us some idea of the inner preparation necessary before the Masonic initiation. To this qualification also there is a symbolical meaning, for the man who is aspiring towards the light ought even already at least to have begun to free himself from the domination of circumstances, which so hopelessly enslave the ordinary man of the world. He ought at least to have some glimmering of the truth that these very circumstances which so limit and oppress him may themselves be used by the strong soul as stepping stones to a wider and more glorious life. All these preliminaries being finished, the right worshipful master issues the command that the candidate shall be admitted in due course. The inner guard receives him between the two pillars and touches his left breast with the point of the point, asking him whether he feels anything. Receiving an affirmative reply, he then gives the candidate the solemn warning that the remembrance of this action should always operate as a reminder if he should ever be in danger of forgetting his oath to guard the secrets of Freemasonry. Just inside the door of the lodge stand the stewards and junior deacons with crossed wands, representing thereby the triangular door of the ancient Egyptian lodge, and also the first of the symbolical portals through which the candidate has to pass. As he stands within that portal, the candidate is directed to bow his head as a further token of the humility which should mark the aspirant. From the emblematical point of view, the lodge typifies the higher world into which man passes when he leaves this physical plane, so that this first portal represents the gate of death, and in relation to this, the bowing of the head signifies that submission to the divine will with which the man should enter upon this new field of life, calm, and ready to receive without agitation whatever may come. The inner guard, having performed his office, has nothing further to do with the candidate. This we may take as indicating the fact that the man should withdraw entirely from his etheric double as soon as may be after entering the portal of death. He is now taken in hand by the junior deacon, who signifies the astral body in which the newly deceased has to live for a time. The candidate now kneels at the left of the senior warden, while the right worshipful master invokes the blessing of the ministers of the great architect of the universe and that of the most worthy and venerable master of the wisdom, who is the head of our august temple and fraternity throughout the world. Once more a true name is sounded, and the great master and others stand ready to help the candidate to attain to wisdom in himself, to display the beauty of divine humanity in his outward form and actions, and to cooperate with the supreme will in evolution, so preserving perfect harmony between the inner life and the outer form. By this invocation, the right worshipful master acknowledges that our temple is but a lodge at the gate, an entrance to the driveway of a greater temple, the hidden lodge of which the master of our temple and fraternity has charge. In the cyclic progress of civilization, the 7 rays or types of life take preeminence in turn. During the Middle Ages devotion, the 6th type was predominant, but now the 7th type, which includes many forms of ceremonial, is coming into force, so that everywhere interest in it is on the increase, and the time is ripe for a large extension of Masonry, and for the more perfect working and understanding of its ritual. The 3 symbolical journeys. When a man joined the lesser mysteries in Greece or Egypt, it was considered that the first and most important teaching to be given to him was the truth about conditions after death, since they felt that a man might die at any moment and should therefore be in possession of that knowledge. We continue that practice to the present day, and as a prominent part of that teaching, we take the candidate on the 3 symbolical journeys. There are 3 portals or doorways through which the candidate must pass. They are invisible to physical eyes, but are nevertheless perfectly real, because they are made by thought. The first one, as has already been explained, is an emblem of death, the passing out of the physical world into the next stage of life in the lowest part of the astral plane. The candidate enters without sight into that world, but feels the touch of a friend, who takes hold of his hand or arm and guides him on his journey. This friend is the junior deacon who, it will be remembered, represents the astral or emotional principle in the human constitution. The inner guard presides over the first portal on behalf of the right worshipful master, of whom he is an expression on the physical plane. In the first circuit of the lodge, or the first symbolical journey, the candidate finds himself surrounded by horrible noises, including the clanking of chains and the clashing of swords, which are intended to tell him of the din and confusion of the lowest subplane of the astral world, where are gathered after death those who are in bondage to sensual pleasures, or filled with fear, hatred, malice, or revenge. Afterwards, the worshipful junior warden explains that this journey is a faint copy of the trials through which the candidate had to go in the ancient mysteries, when he was led through gloomy caverns, symbolizing the underworld, amid tumultuous sounds, in darkness, surrounded by perils which he could not understand. It is not probable that the average decent person who presents himself for admission to the Masonic fraternity will have after death any consciousness at all of passing through this lowest region, but if it should happen so, he will be prepared to go through the experience calmly and without fear. As the candidate approaches the worshipful junior warden's pedestal, he arrives at the second portal, and is there introduced to the elementals of earth and water, who are related to the region through which he has just symbolically come, which may be thought of as consisting of the solid and liquid subplanes of the astral world. First he turns to the north and makes a suitable offering to the earth elementals, and then to the south to make his offering to the elementals of the water. They are not the same creatures as those who were engaged in building the temple, but they stand quite definitely under their captain, who in turn obeys the worshipful junior warden as the guardian of the second portal. These elementals, which are of the kind sometimes called nature spirits, gather round, and recognize thenceforth the man who has been presented to them. After this ceremony, should the man find himself in any kind of non-physical danger, or in the presence of a malignant influence, he can draw around him a bodyguard of these beings, on account of the brotherhood with them that has now been established. Plate 10 is an attempt to show the appearance of this portal. The worshipful junior warden is seen seated at his pedestal, which is as it were within the thickness of the wall of the second portal. Over his head floats the sphere of his deva representative, who is surrounded by his band of assistants. At the right-hand side of the portal the earth elementals are grouped, and on the left side those of the water, tricksy sprites, ready to play with great gusto their part of resisting intrusion upon their domain until the candidate is properly presented to them, and demonstrates his friendly intentions by a formal offering. For the purpose of clearness we omit from this illustration all that is not necessary for our object. The candidate and the junior deacon who is leading him are not shown, nor are the brethren in the columns. Only the worshipful senior warden appears in the distance, seen faintly through the second portal. The third portal is of course close to his pedestal, but as it is exactly similar in shape to the second, though differing in color, no attempt is made to represent it. It is the quality of discrimination between the higher and the lower, between the real and the unreal, which has enabled the candidate to pass scatheless through these regions of the astral world. The junior deacon, seeking passage for his charge, tells the elementals that he is a blinded child of mortality, seeking immortality. Passing through their regions in the course of his pilgrimage to the higher planes, the candidate is prepared to give up all that belongs to them, all that matter which appertains to these levels, earth to earth and water to water. In this region after death must linger all those who cling to the low grade of emotional existence that embodies itself in this order of matter, only when they have become purified through suffering, and are ready to give up their low emotions, can they shake off this matter from their astral bodies, and pass to higher parts of the astral plane. The candidate will not linger here, for discrimination has taught him that there are better things. He must henceforth be recognized as one of the brothers of light and immortality, not in a state of darkness so far as this level is concerned. The second symbolical journey is similar to the first, except that the noise is gentle instead of harsh. The candidate is still in the astral world, but in the middle part of it, which is much finer and subtler than that through which he has come. This is the place of the common human emotions. The former was rather that of blind passion. The desires that attach ordinary men to the matter of these middle regions are by no means reprehensible, but on the other hand they are not uplifting. All the pleasures of the body that are not coarse or gross build their tenements here, for the abiding of the souls of the dead until they have tired of these things, and are ready to pass onwards. I have given an account of these regions and the people living in them in the astral plane and the other side of death, and the first lieutenant sovereign grand commander of the Comasonic order, the very illustrious brother Annie Besant, has also dealt with them at length in the ancient wisdom. The candidate arrives at the third portal, near the pedestal of the worshipful senior warden, who is its guardian. There, facing east, he is introduced to the elementals of the air, who guard the right side of the portal, and facing west to the elementals of the fire, who guard its left side. Desirelessness is the quality which can pass him through the allurements of this region, so that once more he gives to the elementals what he carries that belongs to them, and passes on their friend, to whom they will be ever ready to lend their treasures, because they know him as a brother of light who will not keep them for himself, but will use them well and return them in due season. Of this journey it is explained by the worshipful senior warden that in the ancient mysteries, as the candidate left the gloomy caverns behind him, he passed into a quiet region, symbolizing the higher subplanes of the underworld, whereinto the rougher, harsher sounds did not penetrate, though still there was some disharmony amid the souls. It is not inappropriate that life in the astral plane after death should be thought of as a journey or a series of journeys. The dead person does go through a series of well-marked changes, as his astral body becomes more and more purified by the elimination of its denser grades of matter. During life, the man's emotions have been acting like magnets, drawing into the astral body coarse astral matter of the lower regions when they have been base, and fine matter of the higher levels when they have been lofty. After death, the man has to sojourn on each of these levels in turn until he has eliminated its grade of matter from his astral body. The Mason who knows this meaning of the symbolical journeys will be prepared after death to use his will so as to vanquish his lower emotions, free himself quickly of the heavier matter, and pass rapidly onward into the heaven world. The third symbolical journey is trodden in the perfect silence that typifies the highest part of the astral plane, on the very borders of the heaven world. At the end of this, the right worshipful master tells the candidate that the dead man whose experience he has been repeating had at this stage reached the threshold of the heavenly world, where perfect silence lulled the weary senses and calm peace enfolded him. The lower world lay below him, before him the joys of heaven, and in the interspace was silence. This was, and is, his experience in the true mysteries. It was symbolized by utter silence in the mysteries of Egypt and Greece. In Freemasonry, it is kept in memory in the silence of the third symbolical journey. At this point, the journeys end. No further elementals or portals are mentioned in the ceremony, though there are 7 orders in all, and many ancient peoples have recognized them in their worship by bowing to the Devas of the north, south, east, and west, the zenith, the nadir, and the center of all. The candidate is not going beyond that particular region of the astral plane on this occasion. He is merely being introduced to a world which he will have to visit many times before he can traverse it readily, and live and work there with perfect ease. In this stage of his career, he symbolizes the pupil on the probationary path, and must practice the 3 qualities of discrimination, desirelessness, and good conduct or self-control, which will make him free of the emotional plane, as he was free of the physical plane before he entered the lodge. Further information as to these requirements will be found in At the Feet of the Master, by J. Krishnamurti, The Path of Discipleship, by the very illustrious brother Annie Besant, and the book The Masters and the Path. 3 kinds of dangers these qualities will help him to overcome: dangers from the outside world, dangers from his own lower nature, and dangers from within himself, that is, from his own virtues if they be unbalanced. The sword at his breast typified the first of these. Later on he will find the sword of his own lower nature in place of it, and later still the compasses that typify the triangle of his higher self, whose very virtues may be exaggerated to become his undoing unless he is ever watchful to keep poise and calmness, and to walk on that middle way which the Lord Buddha has described as the path of safety. In course of time, the candidate, through the practice of these 3 qualifications, will be able to range the entire plane at will. For this activity, discrimination will give him the mental power, desirelessness the emotional power, and good conduct the willpower, and in the highest part of the region no ceremony will ever be needed in order that he may pass through without hindrance, for everything there is instantly responsive and obedient to the enlightened human will. The Brothers of Light are easily recognized there. This portion of the ritual is mainly derived from the symbolic or blue degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, but does not appear in the working of the Grand Lodge of England. In the Scottish Rite ritual worked in lodges under the auspices of the Supreme Council of France, the three symbolical journeys exist, with noise and clashing of swords in the first, with a clanking of bladed weapons in the second, and perfect silence in the third. But there is no invocation of the elementals, although the journeys are compared to the ancient trials by earth, air, fire, and water. An interesting confirmation of the use of these trials or journeys is given in the Transactions of the AQC, in an account of his own initiation by Robert Gillimand, the man who killed Lord Nelson at Trafalgar by shooting him from a French ship. He was initiated during the Siege of Strasbourg, and Tile account, which is dated 1807, says, "It took place accordingly, with all the splendor circumstances admitted, in a hut about 15 feet in length and 6 in breadth, where there was no room to stand up, but which served as a temple notwithstanding. After having made my journeys, which were not very long ones, undergone the trials by fire and water, and the usual tricks, received the signs, words, touches, and other forms, the adjutant, who was our orator, addressed me a very fine speech, in which he explained to me the sublimity of the character I had just obtained, creating me a child of the light. In masculine masonry in England swords are not brought into the lodge, and in the days when gentlemen used to wear swords, they left them outside, but with the co-masons they are used in lodge as powerful instruments of love in the practical magic of the ritual. The obligation. The candidate is now standing in the northwest corner facing the east, and the worshipful senior warden presents him to the right worshipful master as one properly prepared to be made a Freemason. At this point he is given an opportunity to withdraw if he so chooses, but having declared his determination to go forward without fear or rashness, he is led to the altar, the place of light, by the past senior servants. The first step is taken with the left foot pointing forward, and the right foot is brought up to it at right angles, heel to heel, a step about 9 inches long. The left foot is first moved because it is nearest the heart and should remind the candidate to let love have the primary authority in all his decisions. The second and third steps are similar, but of 12 and 15 inches respectively. 3 steps there must be because the qualifications are 3. The quality of love is sometimes counted as a 4th, but really it must permeate them all, and when it is strong it will carry the disciple up into the higher path of the next degree. There are 2 reasons for the length of these 3 steps. Each one carries a man forward further than the preceding one. That is the way of evolution. Every step that is taken adds to a man's strength, so that his next step will be both stronger and longer. Always something is gained but nothing is lost, so that his speed increases on this path by arithmetical progression, and later on he may expect geometrical progression and even progression by squares in his advance. Again, 9, 12, and 15 are in the proportions 3, 4, and 5, which reminds us of the Pythagorean theorem, which is of constant use to the human architect, and presumably in some greater way in the plans of the great architect himself. To the past master especially belongs the use of this great tool, but even now the entered apprentice should learn to reverence it and aspire to use it later on. While the candidate knocks at the altar to take his obligation, some brethren from the seats in the west of the lodge usually stand round behind the candidate, forming a hollow square touching the corners of the altar, with their swords pointing towards the candidate while the master takes from him his obligation. While standing in this attitude, each brother should fix his attention upon the candidate, and should endeavor to pour forth upon him with all his strength the blessing which, as a master mason, it is within his right and power to give. Many candidates are surprised at the terrible solemnity of the oath, which has come down to us from the Middle Ages. In those times the Masons were teaching facts about the inner life and the nature of man, for knowing which the Church would have burnt them alive, and there was thus great need for secrecy, to an extent that excuses the strong language used in the oath, especially when it is remembered that had one person revealed anything, it would have placed all the rest of the lodge in danger of being judicially murdered. The recitation of the obligation being completed, The brothers standing round bring their swords to the carry, that is, upright in the hand, with the elbow in the form of a square, and the brothers in their seats in the east stretch out their right arms horizontally in blessing, and swords and arms are both raised as all sing, "May the vow be kept." When these words are uttered, every brother should wish with all his force that the candidate may have the strength to keep the vow which he has just taken. The right worshipful master now creates, receives, and constitutes the candidate an entered apprentice Freemason, with knocks with the grip upon the five senses placed upon his shoulders and head in turn. Though the right worshipful master confers the degree, he is of course acting on behalf of the head of our ancient theosophical fraternity, and is a channel for his power. Obviously also the three touches of the five senses convey different aspects of that power, corresponding to the three aspects of the blessed Trinity, the first conveying strength to the brain, the second love to the heart, and the third executive ability to the right arm. The general effect of this downpouring of force is to widen somewhat the channel of communication between the ego and the personality of the candidate, another example of the curious correspondence between the admission to this degree and the ordination of the subdeacon. Now that the solemn oath of secrecy has been taken, the hoodwink is removed and the blessing of light is restored to the candidate. In commenting upon this, Brother John Sebastian Marlowe Ward says, "Notice the word restored. Mystical rebirth marks the beginning of our journey towards the light, of our ascent towards God. But it is a restoration, a journey back to Him from whom we came." Exactly the same procedure is followed in the initiatory rites of the Turkish dervishes. Among them, the incident is followed by a beautiful exposition of the mystical meaning of light. It is the divine light, emblem of God Himself, and of divine inspiration. It is present not only in the sacred writings, but in every true believer's heart. The light of the sun itself is but a faint similitude of the divine light of God's love through which and in which we have our being. The emblematical lights. On being restored to the blessing of light, the eye of the new apprentice falls upon the three great emblematical lights in Freemasonry. The furniture of the lodge here reappears under this new name, but as it has already been discussed the matter in Chapter 3, there is no need to repeat here the explanation of the symbology involved. In the Comasonic ritual, the right worshipful master now raises the newly made brother to his feet and turns him around so that he sees for the first time the brothers with their swords at the carry. He explains to him that he must not regard this martial display as a menace, but as a symbol of the protection with which Freemasonry henceforth surrounds him. The brethren then return to their seats. The neophyte is led to the north, facing the worshipful junior warden, and stands there within the cella, subject to the special force which plays in that region, while the right worshipful master stands in front of him and instructs him. First, the master draws the candidate's attention to the three great columns upon which a lodge of Freemasonry symbolically rests, those of the right worshipful master and his two wardens, symbolizing respectively wisdom, strength, and beauty or harmony. These have already been explained in Chapter 2. In the masculine ritual, this explanation of the three columns is put somewhat differently, as they are there described as the three lesser lights, which are explained to be the sun, the moon, and the master of the lodge. This connects up modern masonry with much old symbology in which the moon and the sun largely figure. The sign and pass. In this situation, the right worshipful master also instructs the neophyte in the signs of this degree, a sign, a grip, and a word. The sign in this degree is often supposed to be related to the penalty mentioned in the obligation, but the sign existed long before the penalty, which was invented to fit it. Among the Egyptians the same penalty existed, and even before them among the Nilotic Negroes in Egypt, and probably in other places as well. It mattered enormously to an ancient Egyptian that his body should be cast into the waves, and that he should not be decently buried with the proper rites, which he believed would set him free from the physical body, to which otherwise he might be tied. In the ghost stories of Homer, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, in nearly all cases when unhappy ghosts returned, they did so because they wanted their bodies to be buried with proper rites, in order that they might be set free. The same idea appears in Hindu thought as, for example, in the Garuda Purana, in the story of the ghost of Sudeva, who was released by King Babrivahana. This neglect of ceremonial would not matter to us in modern times, because we have not those ideas, but it is a literal fact that after death a man's own thought could keep him bound in that way until he knew or believed that his body had been properly interred. So this was a very ancient penalty. In reality, the sign refers to a certain chakra and its working, as I have already explained. It is, of course, not permissible to describe the girdle, but it will not be difficult for a Freemason to understand that it implies the repression of the astral body, which is the first of the superphysical principles of man. Examination and investiture. The junior deacon next takes the neophyte to the pedestals of the worshipful junior warden and the worshipful senior warden for examination of his knowledge of the signs, grips, and words, and he stands before each for a little while, during the series of questions and answers, within the beehive form which has been described in Chapter 4. While he is standing in that place, the force of the inner planes plays upon him with concentrated intensity, and strengthens him in the qualifications which he has to develop. At the command of the right worshipful master, the worshipful senior warden now invests the new brother with the distinguishing badge of a Freemason, the apron, which has already been described in Chapter 4. Having thus invested the neophyte, the worshipful senior warden delivers a little homily, in which he refers to the great antiquity and dignity of this symbol, and the right worshipful master adds to this a remark on the importance of not entering the lodge if one brother is at variance with another. On this point, Brother John Sebastian Marlowe Ward makes the following very suggestive remarks. At first sight, this may seem a somewhat unnecessary charge. Normally well-conducted gentlemen are not likely to start an unseemly wrangle in lodge, even if they are at enmity, and should two men so far forget the common decency of life as to do so, the right worshipful master has ample power to deal with the situation. The real significance of the injunction is that it implies that the mere presence of two brethren who are at variance will disturb the harmonious atmosphere of the meeting. This is a purely spiritual atmosphere, and the belief that such disturbance would occur without any open disagreement is correct. In short, such differences disturb the spiritual atmosphere, preventing concentration, and can be detected by sensitive individuals. Every lodge has an atmosphere of its own, and any sensitive man who comes to it can detect it. I have myself noticed the different atmospheres of various lodges, and also variations in that of my own. Too much regard, therefore, cannot be paid to this rule, and if it is ignored, the lodge will certainly suffer. After this advice has been given, the new A is directed to his seat in the northeast part of the lodge, that being the point of the compass where the Egyptians believed that the sun began his journey when he was first created. The working tools. The interpretation given to the working tools of the entered apprentice in ordinary craft masonry is explained to the new brother by the worshipful junior warden at his initiation. This officer does it because he is in charge of the chamber where the entered apprentices work. In masculine craft masonry, the trowel, forceps, iron, and gauge is described as indicating a measure of time, to remind him that the hours of his day are to be spent not in mere carelessness or selfishness, but partly in meditation and study, and partly in labor, refreshment, and sleep. In comasonry we add, but all in the service of humanity. It is also explained that this symbol indicates that accuracy and precision are essential for the proper conduct of our lives. The entered apprentice is further taught that the chisel and gavel reminds us that skill without exertion is of little avail, and that labor is the lot of man. It also represents the force of conscience, which should keep down all vain and unbecoming thoughts, so that our feelings and actions may be pure and unpolluted. Thirdly, comes the chisel, which points out that education and perseverance are necessary to establish perfection, and that the rude material of our natures receives its polish and refinement from repeated efforts alone. In ancient Egypt, rather, a different signification was given to these tools, a little nearer to the original, since it is obvious that education and conscience are not exactly tools for a man to use. It will be noticed that all three are specially connected with the shaping of the stone. As the operative mason shapes the rough ashlar into the perfect ashlar by removing the excrescences and smoothing and measuring it, so must the entered apprentice in speculative masonry train himself perfectly in morality. In ancient Egypt, the apprentice remained in that condition usually for 7 years, until he satisfied those in authority that he was fit to pass on to the second degree. In the present day, the qualifications have become little more than the lapse of time and the answering of certain questions. In early Christianity, there were 3 recognized stages through which everyone had to pass who wished to make progress: purification, illumination, and perfection. St. Paul said, "We speak wisdom among them that are perfect." This is often misunderstood. Obviously, if the people were perfect in the modern sense of the term, they would not need to be taught at all. These words are not used in their ordinary sense. They are technical terms used in connection with the mysteries, and well known by all educated people of that period as being so used. What St. Paul said was, "We teach the gnosis, the secret wisdom, only to those who have attained the degree of perfection," or, as a mason would put it, the degree of the master mason, because those 3 stages correspond in a general way to the 3 degrees in masonry. Nowadays, the Christian Church seems to stop at the first stage, purification, and to regard it as its greatest work to make people saints. That is indeed a very high and noble thing, but in the older days of Christianity, to make a man a saint was only a preliminary stage. Saint Clement of Alexandria, one of the greatest of the Christian fathers, says, "Purity, that is only a negative virtue valuable chiefly as a condition of insight." When the man had made himself perfectly pure and holy in his life, he was eligible for the second stage, that of illumination, and only after he was fully illuminated could he pass on to the stage of perfection, and so become a channel for God's power. Egyptian interpretation of the working tools. In ancient Egypt, the tracing floor for instruction, or ground floor, or as it was then, the tracing floor for entered apprentice instruction, or ground floor or sacred cubit of the Great Pyramid, was nearly the same as ours. Their unit of measure, the inch, was derived from the accurate knowledge which the Egyptians had of the polar diameter of the earth, 1/500,000,000th division of this being the pyramid inch. Our English inch of the present day was derived, through Greece and Rome, from this Egyptian measure, but it is not quite the same unit as that which was used in the building of the Great Pyramid. In the course of time it has been made a little shorter. It has lost about 1,000th part of itself, so that the pyramid inch is 1.0011 of the English inch. It is only in the last century that men have come to know the length of the equatorial diameter of the earth, but the polar diameter was known long ago. Many countries still retain measures of length derived from the pyramid inch, but in France the decimal system was adopted. There they have the meter, which was intended to be 1/10,000,000th part of a quadrant of the earth, measured over the surface from the pole to the equator. Later they discovered that this measure was not perfectly accurate, so a meter is now a conventional length standardized by a bar kept in Paris, just as a standard yard is kept in London. Scientific knowledge in that ancient land was in some respects fully as advanced as our own, indeed even more advanced than was ours until very recently. The mysteries included a thorough and liberal education, and a special stress seems to have been laid upon chemistry, astronomy, and geodesy. In the very early ages, when the Great Pyramid, the House of Light, was built, a vast amount of information was already in the possession of those who erected that stupendous monument, and they so designed its proportions as to enshrine within it in what they hoped was an indestructible form a great deal of this invaluable knowledge. For example, the perimeter of the base is to the height as is the circumference of a circle to its radius, mathematically 2 pi. It is interesting, too, that the base circuit measures in pyramid inches exactly the number of days in 100 years. The exact size of the Earth is also indicated there, as well as a number of other calculations connected with the solar system. Many of these have been carefully worked out by Richard Anthony Proctor, the English astronomer, and Sir Gaston Maspero, the French Egyptologist, to whom I was introduced by Madame Blavatsky. Davidson and Aldersmith in the Great Pyramid present a large amount of information on this subject. They remark, the external features, dimensions, and units of the Great Pyramid, when studied in plan, will be found to give precisely and accurately every essential value of the Earth's orbit and its motions. This includes the values of the sidereal and solar years, the mean sun distance, the sun's diameter, and the maximum and minimum values of the eccentricity of the Earth's orbit. The Great Pyramid was a house for initiations, and if some criminal Mohammedan fanatics had not destroyed the outer casing of it, we should still have there, enshrined in stone, measurements of many astronomical phenomena more accurate than any that were available to us until the last century. It is only recently that reliable measurements have been obtained by European astronomers of the average distance of the Earth from the Sun. When I was a boy, we were taught that it was 96 million miles, then they got it down to 93 million. Later, calculations were made from very careful measurements of the mean equatorial horizontal solar parallax, taken at the time of the transits of Venus in 1874 and 1882, and they estimated it at 92.5 million miles. I remember that Mr. Gladstone announced that in the House of Commons, and it aroused great interest at the time. In the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, it is given as 92,998,000 miles. The ancient Egyptians made it 92,996,08 miles. Who shall say that they may not have been nearer to the truth than we? In ancient Egypt, the tracing floor for instruction or ground floor was taken as the symbol of instinct. I am using there a word which is generally applied only to animals, and I do not want it to be misunderstood. By instinct was meant an inner feeling, the instinctive feeling that we have with regard to things. To this they attached a great deal of importance. They considered it as having two sides, the negative or the receptive, which gives us the feeling as to whether a thing is good or bad, or suitable or unsuitable for us, and an active side which we should now call taste, that is, the knowing exactly what is the right thing to have and to do, and what things will go together, will fit and harmonize. In relation to our fellow creatures, that would be tact. So the meaning of this idea of instinct was much wider than that of the present day. In those days, people, at least in Egypt, in Crete, in Greece, lived very close to nature, in the sunshine and fresh air, and they enjoyed those things in a way which we see now only perhaps among great poets and artists. They were nearer to the heart of things, and therefore their instincts were much more trustworthy than those of most people at the present day. Instinct was thus with them a definite tool to be used in the shaping and building of character. A good deal of that has been lost, as modern people have for so long led such artificial lives and have usually allowed their reason to override their instinct, even when that reason has had little material on which to found its judgments. I have myself had these instincts on many occasions, and I believe the experience is quite common. Sometimes I have put them aside as not prompted by reason, as many men do, but in the long run I have always been sorry for not paying more respect to them. The instinct is not dead, and when encouraged can be revived by many people to quite a large extent. The Egyptians took the chisel to symbolize the intellect, which they regarded as a keen-edged instrument. They considered that the man who used his intellect would be able to remove the excrescences of superstition from the beliefs which presented themselves to him, until he became a perfect ashlar, when his thought would be well-defined and true. The common gavel was considered to be the divine force behind the chisel, and was interpreted as the will. This must not, of course, be confused with the master's gavel, with which it has nothing in common, from which it differs even in shape. The distinction is also made clear by the fact that this tool is always spoken of as the common gavel. In his work, The Magic of Freemasonry, Major Arthur Edward Powell has made an interesting study of the working tools of the first degree, in a chapter specially devoted to them. He takes the tracing floor for instruction or ground floor as a symbol of the wisdom of the right worshipful master, who has to measure and plan as he rules, the gavel as an emblem of the strength of the worshipful senior warden, it being the instrument for the transmission of force, and the chisel for the beauty of the worshipful junior warden, it being the tool used for shaping the material. He points out that all accurate or scientific knowledge is based on measurement, symbolized by the tracing floor for instruction or ground floor, that all work in life is done by the movement of matter, affected by energy which gives blows to it, for which the gavel is the symbol, and that the chisel is typical of the concentration of purpose as it cleaves through matter. Thus, he says, knowledge is gained with the tracing floor for instruction or ground floor, feelings are understood with the chisel, and action occurs with the gavel. Each of these tools, he adds, must be taken as typical of a class, the tracing floor for instruction or ground floor for all measuring instruments, the gavel for all implements and machines for applying force, the chisel for all tools used for cutting and penetrating matter. Chapter 7. The Second Degree. The questions. A parallel has already been drawn between the 3 degrees of blue masonry and the 3 stages of progress recognized by the early Christian Church. Just as the conquest of passions and emotions is prescribed for the first degree, thus corresponding with the idea of purification, so in the second degree the idea of illumination is put before us in the reminder that its special object is to develop the intellectual, artistic, and psychic faculties. As is stated in our ritual, the candidate for this degree must first give proof of his proficiency in the first degree. I mentioned in an earlier chapter that in ancient days the entered apprentice remained at that stage for a period of 7 years, and indeed in some cases the period was even longer, since the candidate was carefully watched in the conduct of his daily life by his superiors, and it was only when they were fully satisfied that he had fairly developed the necessary qualities within himself that he was permitted to pass on. In these days no time limit seems to be set, although in the Comasonic Constitution it is understood that he shall have attended a certain definite number of lodge meetings, and also a special class held at regular intervals for the instruction of entered apprentices. He is also expected to be able to repeat by heart the oath of the first degree and to answer in open lodge a few prescribed questions. To the first of these we have already referred. It is of importance because it strikes the keynote of the whole, for when the candidate is asked where he was first prepared to be made a Freemason, he is instructed to reply, "In my heart," thus showing that the inner preparation is regarded as of even greater importance than the outer. He has then to describe the physical plane preparation and to explain that he was initiated in the body of a lodge just, perfect, and regular. Then comes the quaintly expressed idea that the sun is always at its meridian with respect to Freemasonry, which may be interpreted that the Logos is always pouring forth his full power through each Masonic lodge, wherever it may be situated. There seems to have been a stage in Masonic history in which it was the custom to divide the lodge into 3, or to hold it in 3 rooms, the outermost being that of the entered apprentices, with the worshipful junior warden in the chair, while in the second room the worshipful senior warden presided over the fellow crafts, and it was only in the third room that the right worshipful master sat in charge of the master masons. That has been given as a reason why the senior deacon, having conveyed the commands of the right worshipful master to the worshipful senior warden, has to await the return of the junior deacon from the outer room. According to that theory, as the worshipful junior warden presides over the lodge of the entered apprentices, and as he represents the sun at its meridian, It is fitting that the ceremony of initiation should be said figuratively to take place at midday. Then comes Freemasonry's curious description of itself as a peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. This reply has always seemed to me somewhat misleading. It is not the Masonic morality which is peculiar, for that is the same which is proclaimed by every religion in the world. What is perhaps rightly to be claimed by Freemasonry is that its statement of the system is peculiarly felicitous, and that the method of its illustration is unique and forceful. Freemasonry is certainly one of the most interesting and influential of the secret societies of the world, numbering in its ranks some 5 millions of men pledged to observe the ties of brotherhood, and in its wonderful pageants of ceremonial, in the rituals of its many degrees, orders, chivalries and rites are enshrined splendid ideals and deep spiritual teaching of the most absorbing interest to the student of the hidden side of life. Although today Masons do not call their craft a religion, it has nevertheless a religious origin, as we have already seen, and it does religious work in helping its initiates and through them the rest of the world. To many of the brethren it is the only real religion they have ever had, and certainly many of them put its principles nobly into practice. For masculine Masonry is a stupendous charitable organization as well as a system of morality, and it offers a splendid training in practical kindliness and fraternity. In England and its colonies and in the United States of America, Masonic charities are on a magnificent scale, and there are many exceedingly well-managed Masonic schools and orphanages. On this account, and because of the excellent character of its members, Masonry is highly respected, although in France and Italy it has lost caste to some extent because it has there allowed itself to become identified with anti-clerical political parties. Unfortunately, modern Masons have altogether lost sight of what might be called the inner charity, their power on higher planes. They would scarcely understand if one should say to them, "You ought to be sending out streams of thought power, that should be one of your forms of charity." It is a pity that inner work should be so much overlooked, for it is a tremendous agency for good, and one in which every brother can take part. External charity depends upon the private wealth of the few, but any Mason, however poor, can give his thought. Naturally, Masonic lodges are not all at the same intellectual level, and some spend far too much time in banquets and too little in study, but one has only to read the literature on the subject to see that, in English-speaking countries at least, the aims of the craft have always been noble and uplifting. Note, for example, the following statements. The real object of Freemasonry may be summed up in these words: to efface from among men the prejudices of caste, the conventional distinctions of color, origin, opinion, nationality, to annihilate fanaticism and superstition, extirpate national discord, and with it extinguish the firebrand of war, in a word, to arrive, by free and pacific progress, at one formula and model of eternal and universal right, according to which each individual human being shall be free to develop every faculty with which he may be endowed, and to concur heartily and with the fullness of his strength in the bestowment of happiness upon all, and thus to make of the whole human race one family of brothers, united by affection, wisdom, and labor. The whole world is but one republic, of which each nation is a family, and every individual a child. Masonry, not in any way derogating from the different duties which the diversity of states requires, tends to create a new people, which, composed of men of many nations and tongues, shall all be bound together by the bonds of science, morality, virtue. That the sentiments expressed above have not remained mere theories is shown by the following extract from Dr. Churchward's Arcana of Freemasonry. Only a few years ago we in this country went through great and acute tension, that danger which threatened war between us and the United States of America. That has passed, and will never return in an acute form again. Why? Because the Brotherhood sent their great representative, the Grand Master of Illinois, to this country, and I had the great pleasure of meeting him at the Quatuor Coronati Lodge, where he delivered the message of peace and brotherhood. There shall be no war between the United States of America and England. We are of one brotherhood, and the Freemasons of the United States have decided that there shall be no war, now or ever, between the two countries, and I am delegated to come here and tell you this, representing over 1 million of brothers, and ask you in return to say there shall be no war. This is a splendid testimony to the power of the Masonic tie. It is unfortunate that an attempt made later to prevent the Great European War should have failed, for the Prussian Grand Lodges, when a similar appeal was made to them, refused to support the movement for peace. The next question asked is as to the principles on which our order is founded, which are usually given as brotherly love, relief, and truth. Great prominence is rightly given to these three virtues in the ritual of the masculine craft, and in the lectures officially prepared to be used in its lodges they are described as follows. By the exercise of brotherly love we are taught to regard the whole human species as one family, the high and low, rich and poor, created by one almighty being, and sent into the world for the aid, support, and protection of each other. On this principle Masonry unites men of every country, sect, and opinion, and by its dictates cultivates true friendship among those who might otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance. To relieve the distressed is a duty incumbent on all men, particularly among Masons, who are linked together by one indissoluble bond of sincere affection. Hence, to soothe the unhappy, sympathize in their misfortunes, compassionate their miseries, and restore peace to their troubled minds, is the grand aim we have in view. On this basis we establish our friendship and form our connections. Truth is a divine attribute, and the foundation of every Masonic virtue. To be good men and true is a lesson we are taught at our initiation. On this grand theme we contemplate, and by its unerring dictates endeavor to regulate our lives and actions. Hence hypocrisy and deceit are or ought to be unknown to us, sincerity and plain dealing are distinguishing characteristics, while the heart and tongue join in promoting each other's welfare, and in rejoicing in the prosperity of the craft. The rest of the questions, though quaint, seem self-explanatory, and the various points which they raise have been already considered. The pass grip and the password are then given to the candidate. In connection with these, it is interesting to note that a sheaf of corn is often carved on the chair of the worshipful senior warden as his emblem, and this is probably connected with the fact that an ear of corn was shown to the aspirant as symbolical of the supreme mystery at Eleusis, indicating to him at the same time the universality of evolution and the indestructibility of life. Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. It is perhaps worth noting that the pass grip between the first and the second degree indicates the necessity for the conquest of that peculiar entanglement of the lower mind in the meshes of desire which in theosophical literature is spoken of as kamamonas. Brother Wilmshurst remarks, "This is meant to be descriptive of the candidate himself and of his own spiritual condition. It is he who is an ear of corn planted near and nourished by a fall of water. His own spiritual growth, as achieved in the apprentice stage, is typified by the ripening corn, the fertilizing cause of its growth being the downpouring upon his inner nature of the vivifying dew of heaven as the result of his aspiration towards the light. The preparation. It will be noticed that in the preparation of the candidate the same principle is followed as that which governed the corresponding ceremony in the first degree. The left arm is made bare because it is through that the power is to be poured down, and also because during the ceremony of passing the left elbow is to be supported by the square. In the same way the right breast is treated in a similar manner because the inner guard will touch it with the sword on admitting the candidate to the lodge. As before, the right knee is uncovered and the left hand supplicating sign supported, because these are the points in contact with the highly magnetized floor or altar cushion, during the taking of the obligation and the actual conferring of the degree. The inner preparation. The inner preparation in this degree is in part the same as that in the first, for the candidate hopes to obtain the privilege of being passed to the second degree by the help of God, the assistance of the square, and the virtue of a passing grip and passing word. The square here mentioned is the quadrilateral of the personality. Two things must happen with reference to that. It has been brought into subjection, as is implied in his treading upon it on entering the lodge, but it has not lost its strength and activity thereby. It is as active as ever, but now all its energy is turned to the service of the real man, the higher self. That higher self incarnated in a personality for the sake of acquiring definiteness. The ego on his own plane is magnificent, but vague in his magnificence, except in the case of men far advanced on the road of evolution. Now, in the symbolism of this degree, the personality has seen with all clearness that the purpose of life is to serve the higher. He throws himself into the task with vigor and so gives some of his definiteness to make the purpose of the ego clear to himself. He makes a call to the warrior within to use the symbology of light on the path. The opening. While the preparation of the candidate